Those who dominate their eras are powerful heroes or supreme existence far above all others. They carry with them an obliterating power that outshines everything else. There once was a king who managed to build an empire. He was also the leader of a great organization. Throughout history, there are those remembered for their feats, defeating a demon king, curing diseases, or simply being powerful. But the boy thinks about this and becomes enraged, believing all these stories are a huge joke. He clenches his fists, filled with hatred. And that boy was trained the way they wanted, starting at the age of 10. But the kid ended up becoming a punching bag in the process, shaped however they pleased. To grow stronger, surviving was truly a great sacrifice. Even that beautiful girl made him feel genuine despair despite her smile. And amidst all that bitterness, he still had to hear things like, "This is all for your own good, so you'll grow stronger." At least the time to say goodbye to all of it is almost here. To all the scars carved into his soul. To leave that damn place behind, the Hall of Heroes. This boy, who has suffered so much until now, is named Davy. He is the one who owns this thrilling journey. The girls regret that he's still just a poor little bastard. They should have made him suffer more, but he doesn't hide his relief. Despite their youthful appearance, they're all elders who've lived for millennia. For calling them old hags, one of them flew into a rage and shattered a stone with a single punch. She tries to take the boy out, claiming he must have a death wish, but the protagonist simply ignores her tantrum. They were trying to hold her back, but she was determined to teach him a lesson, offering a free facial reconstruction without anesthesia. And she kept trying to shake off those holding her back, but realized her efforts would be in vain. Meanwhile, the boy continued to ignore her completely. Despite the joking remark, it was still a farewell. And for all it's worth, the youthful-looking elder would miss him. She asked that while the boy lived, he wouldn't forget them. For a moment, he looked at all those people intently, almost as if in admiration. But he soon turned his feet away, uninterested in remembering those days. Leaving behind many of those who contributed to his harsh training, the boy walks his path, but there's a faint smile on his face. And from the bottom of his heart, he hopes he never sees those degenerates again. As he continues forward, everything fades away until only light remains, a blinding, intense light. Now he's lying down, and it seems medication is being administered intravenously into his body. There is no one else in the room. The curtains sway gently in the soft breeze. That hand can barely move. His body is so weak he can hardly open his eyes. It took so much effort that he gave up trying. At last, he had returned to that place. There's a painting hanging on the wall of the room. He is the weak and forsaken prince, and his full name is Davy Al Round. The Round Kingdom lies in the eastern part of the continent, an insignificant country that produced an equally insignificant heir. Unlike his former life, he imagined there would be some privileges in being born noble, like a bit of luxury. But clearly, he was just a fool for thinking that. He thought his life would be peaceful, not realizing how dangerous the heir's position was. Those who conspired against his family poisoned Chalice, and he grew up constantly under attack. Because he was weak, he was also at risk of being expelled from the family. In his memories, he began to recall being watched by someone and preferred to forget that part. His priority now is to recover. He can deal with everything else later. Let fate wait, because once he's recovered, he'll be capable of anything. He'll be able to defeat every one of those who conspired against him, especially that blonde brat, because the protagonist was trained by heroes for thousands of years. The poor boy is crying alone, but it seems someone found him, someone who saw that newbie hiding. This startled the protagonist. Damn, the guy can't even cry in peace without some son of a bitch showing up to bug him. Stay strong, my protagonist. It's one of the heroes who trained him who already knows the boy got a legendary beating. It was even beautiful to watch. If he came here just to make fun of him, let him, said the protagonist, because he has no patience left for giving responses. They are the ones who welcome him warmly, only to ignore him later once they realize he was weak and useless. The truth is, he felt very uncomfortable with it, but since he was weak, he had to endure everything in silence. And now he's there, visibly upset. He didn't go to that place by his own will and doesn't even really know what he's supposed to do. The hero tried to comfort the boy, saying those people are egocentric and that none of it is his fault, because he doesn't know what it means to be a hero, and the real hero there said that the answer to that question is what everyone is searching for. So it's time for the newbie to cheer up a bit, he said while grabbing him by the shoulders, because he decided he would help him find his own answer. After all, they had become family. But the protagonist disagrees with that statement. He doesn't even know these people yet. The hero in front of him is named Hercules, and he's a survival expert. From that point on, he would dedicate himself to training the boy's weak body. The news did make the protagonist very happy, since he suspects the process might be painful and downright awful. Hercules said they needed to get along, but the protagonist, desperate, said he hadn't even given his consent yet. That was just a dream filled with his old memories. And now he had woken up once again. He's still bedridden, receiving that intravenous medication. Apparently, it really did happen somehow. He had returned to his own world. Still lying down, he hears the door to his room open. As the person approaches, the protagonist tries to figure out how long he's been back. And during all that time, only one person has come to visit and take care of him. The same maid every single time. Of course, things would be like that. After all, he had remained in that condition for a long time. But the idea that only one person has taken care of him bothers him. It really shows that no one else cares. Still, he should be a bit more grateful. At least someone is tending to his body, which remains in this state. Opening one eye, he tries to see what's happening in his room. He tries to sit up in bed. It's still very difficult to move his body, and there are many things he needs to check right away. The first thing he does is reach for a calendar. After all, he needs to know what day it is and how much time has passed. It's the 278th day of the year Baldus. Come on, is it so hard for the author to also recycle basic concepts like calendars? We already get that it's a fantasy world. Anyway, it's been 6 full years since he was struck by that arrow. The boy still holds the calendar in his hand and begins to think, remembering the day he was hit in the back by those arrows. Meaning it's already been 6 years since he was attacked, and it's about time someone paid for it. He can't go back to being the same pathetic person, so he needs to stay focused on fully recovering. Looking at his own hand, he decides it's time to begin. He clenched his fist tightly, with all the strength he could muster, giving his body a command to restore itself. After that, he opened his hand, waiting for a result, until he realized that nothing had happened. Absolutely nothing. He doesn't understand why nothing is happening. At the very least, something should have. The protagonist is staring at his hands when a glow appears before him. The heroine said he has a lot of divine power flowing through his hands. That's not exactly a bad thing, but he needs to learn something about it. He could end up becoming the most skilled at controlling that type of power. Divine power really is something admirable. It comes from the deity that governs purity and health. Only those loved by this deity can receive such power. Daphne was the one who taught the protagonist how to use it. She had to learn it all on her own, and thanks to her effort, the protagonist was able to learn something. The biggest problem is that his original body remained inactive for 6 years. Despite the challenges, all the experience he has is stored in his soul. But his body is still extremely weakened, so he'll need some more time before he can use his full potential. Even the most basic healing ability isn't working because his body is as broken down as an old car. He tries to use healing magic over and over again. In other circumstances, he would have already given up at this point. But his determination had been refined. He even threatened his own body. It better become useful soon, or things would get complicated. After that internal dialogue, he finally managed to cast his first spell, and he couldn't afford to waste such a great opportunity, successfully healing himself with the healing magic. At last, he had the strength to stand on his own 2 feet. It's truly incredible that he actually managed to do it, because now he was able to use sacred power with his own body. The rest of his abilities will return as soon as he fully recovers his body. The first thing the boy did was walk over to the window, feeling the soft breeze brushing against his face. On top of that, the view he had of the kingdom was truly beautiful. It had been a long time since he last saw the sun. That ended up giving the protagonist a wonderful idea. Now with a mischievous smile on his face, he stretched out both arms, hands wide open. With all the power he currently had, he was going to worship the sun. Before he could finish whatever he was doing, he heard a strange sound, ceramic shattering. It was the maid who had dropped the plate, and right after, she started screaming. The boy froze, caught off guard as well. That woman was in doubt. Was it really the prince? Was he truly all right? The boy wished he hadn't been seen under those circumstances. He felt so embarrassed he wished he could go back into a coma. The news that he had woken up spread quickly. The doctor came to see him. After examining him, the doctor said it was a bit strange since the prince's condition had completely disappeared. The boy tried to smile discreetly, hiding the origin of his sudden recovery. Faced with that abrupt recovery, the doctor asked him a few more questions, but all the boy felt in that moment was exhaustion. That made the doctor quite reflective. In another time, our protagonist would have been more formal when speaking to an elder. In fact, he even misses those manners. But now he must behave like someone of royalty, even if it's royalty from the most insignificant kingdom on the continent. And at the moment, he is the primary heir to the throne. A woman full of envy entered the room, saying his recovery was indeed very resilient. She started approaching our protagonist to inspect him as well. He knew exactly who that pompous yet utterly despicable woman was. Lines is the current queen, the one responsible for poisoning the protagonist's mother. From now on, let's call her the resentful one. Even her children were there, the second prince, whom we'll call the jealous one, and the third prince, Bullhead. The jealous one looked at our protagonist with a sense of superiority. They had all come to see if the rumors were true, and the protagonist explained that his body was still very weak. The resentful one even had the audacity to ask if he saw who had fired those arrows. But he wasn't sure who it might have been. They came from far away. He then asked if anyone had been captured, because that was clearly an attempt on the heir's life. And staring deeply at the jealous one, he wanted to know what kind of punishment such a person would receive. While the jealous one practically soiled himself, the resentful one replied that no one had been arrested. Moreover, the investigation had been completely closed. Since they had nothing else to do there, they left. The doctor had already done everything he could, but believed that our protagonist would be fully recovered in a matter of days. And now he would leave him in the room so he could complete his recovery. Apparently, the resentful one's family had left the room. She said it would have been better if the protagonist had remained bedridden or died. He asked her if she was bothered, now that the speck in her eye had come back to life. Scared out of his mind, the jealous one said the protagonist was a weak hair for having stayed in a coma. He should teach them how to take arrows in the back right. Finally, the envious family left the room. Even from outside, our protagonist could hear them speaking degrading things about him. So he started focusing on one of his hands. During all this time, he had been using divine magic, but no one noticed, probably due to the immense power gap. The protagonist's initial objective was to destroy the resentful one's family, but after seeing them in person, he changed his mind. It would be like an elephant crushing a few ants. Maybe his temperament was refined during those years of training, but he feels this revenge is too insignificant. Still, he decided what he's going to do. He just won't prioritize it now because his biggest goal is to fully recover. And after so long without eating, he wonders what his next meal will be. It was time to make the first update to his appearance, so as a first step, he cut off his 80s rocker hair. Terrible decision. Several weeks had passed since he started using his divine power. And to speed up his recovery, he was also doing physical exercises. Even so, his routine had been very boring. There was nothing fun to do. However, since he's been focusing on the circulation of his mana, his recovery has been really fast. In addition, he's been adding to his knowledge, studying necromancy and traditional medical practices, since both involve deep understanding of the human body. Now the protagonist can do some really cool things just by snapping his fingers, like making water flow around his body. Truly, using magic makes life so much easier. While he was distracted, someone said there was a message for him. It was Amy, who had just arrived, but that news didn't exactly excite him. His meal had also been brought, and it didn't look appetizing at all. It was just a generic soup. That shattered expectation of eating something tasty hit harder than the arrows in his back. Since he's still considered a patient, he's being treated like an old man. Since Amy couldn't do anything about it, she apologized to the prince. Those nutrients wouldn't be enough, so he ordered her to bring 5 more servings. But after finishing his plate, he realized he needed 10 portions, leaving the maid very surprised. Seeing her hesitation, he reassured her, saying it was fine. He could eat everything without wasting any. Thanks to healing magic, his digestion is extremely fast. Apparently, the protagonist has become a machine, a poop machine. However, he really does feel like his body is getting better and better, with food in, food out. And someone who eats like that will eventually need to go to the bathroom. At least he's not constipated. That would definitely be worse. Sitting in a chair, he's wearing glasses and reading a few things. He ended up facing an unexpected problem. The maid apologized to the prince, but he knows she's not to blame for any of it. An invoice had been sent to him. The prince would have to pay for what he was eating. So he asked the maid how many staff were working there. A bit embarrassed, she said she was the only one working in that place, which left the protagonist surprised. That was a bit of a problem, but it didn't really bother the prince. Many princes had lived in that house before, but now there was only a single maid in charge. Realizing he'd need to manage the place, he asked how much money had been allocated to them. The maid said they had received 6,000 gold coins, but currently there were only 10 left. Finding that extremely suspicious, he asked what their monthly budget was supposed to be, and the maid said they were supposed to receive 500 coins, but what they actually received was less than 100. The first thing our protagonist thought was that someone was siphoning off funds. Then he became concerned about the maid's salary and asked how things were for her. He didn't want to ask twice. He considered it important to know if she was being paid fairly. The girl was a little hesitant to say, but she had only been receiving 1/3 of her full salary just for working for the prince. That was proof enough that she's a good person, but she's still quite naive. Maids like her often become property of nobles. Amy herself is the daughter of a baron. She became a maid due to some life complications and now takes care of small tasks. And over the past 6 years, she's been dedicated to caring for the prince. Despite all the hardships, it felt good knowing there was someone loyal on his side. He told her to take the part of her salary she hadn't been receiving. The maid found that very strange, but our protagonist was unyielding. He also asked her not to call him prince anymore, it was too formal. The maid wasn't used to that and tried to push back a little. Using the full extent of his charm, the protagonist said that formality makes them feel distant from one another. The guy's a player, my friend. But it makes sense that he be kind to the only person who supported him through all this. He went to the royal finance office. He didn't expect to have to do it personally, but he needed to solve his problems. Even though he went there, he still hadn't seen his own father. The maid wasn't sure if she should have told him about the missing funds, because if the queen found out, it would cause a big problem. The protagonist is fully aware of the wrongdoing and the risk his maid is taking, but he doesn't intend to back down. He told her not to get distracted and to stay with him. She might fall behind. The truth is, the protagonist feels nothing but contempt for his father, who did nothing after the death of his wife. And he seems quite interested in the maid who cared for him over the past 6 years. Dealing with the finance officer, the protagonist ran into red tape. The man said he couldn't do anything about funds that had already been dispersed. Just seeing the mustache on that lazy bureaucrat was enough to make our protagonist extremely irritated. Then he began looking at the books inside the finance office. He'd already been suspecting it, but it was as if those people were underestimating him. Even that horrid mustached clerk. But the protagonist was already fed up with all of it and flopped into one of the armchairs without care. He sighed deeply at the situation, and with a very serious, piercing look, he asked if the clerk was messing with him. Not just that clerk, but everyone in the room was shocked by his reaction. Then he got straight to the point and asked the clerk why he hadn't been receiving all of his coins. The clerk said they were cutting maintenance costs at the castle. Apparently, all nobles do the same. Sighing again, the protagonist said the clerk was really testing the limits of his patience, because the place he's living in has no maintenance whatsoever. Everything looks neglected and abandoned. So he was waiting for an explanation from the clerk about this situation, especially where the money was actually being invested. In front of a noble, even one who was clearly angry, the clerk couldn't do anything but comply. It's not common for princes to be aware of their own finances, and because of that, the accounting clerk hadn't been prepared. His answer was completely useless. He said the finance department doesn't oversee maintenance payments. Even if the prince kept asking questions, that office just manages the budget. They're not there to hand out money. The protagonist had already expected to hear something like that. He said that no matter the department, they would always find someone else to shift the blame to. Since he finished his business there, he was going to leave. The finance clerk asked if he was heading to the maintenance department, but the prince had no reason to go there, because he knew they would give the same explanation, just pass the blame to another department to buy more time. And he recommended the clerk use the embezzled money to buy something for himself. Back in the hallways, our protagonist sarcastically commented how well maintained the place was. It's really hard to deal with nobility, especially considering how well those clerks are paid. Even while receiving only part of her salary, Amy continues working for him. Looking at his maid with a friendly gaze, he asked if she could fetch a sword for him, leaving the girl very startled. But he made a point to explain he wasn't going to cut anyone with the weapon, and started laughing at her reaction. She had gotten really scared. Even so, the maid said she'd get one. The protagonist didn't lie to her. He doesn't intend to cut a person. What he's going to cut doesn't even deserve to be called human. The protagonist has just activated violence mode. Since he's in a fragile position, if he starts cutting people for no reason, it would be a huge problem. He'd be exiled in no time, as the nobles would say he'd gone mad. There's no way they would tolerate such actions. But our protagonist has no intention of staying in a position of weakness before this rotten nobility. After some effort, he managed to hunt a boar. Amy couldn't understand how he pulled that off, and our protagonist said he just happened to find the animal in front of the castle. That was a lie. He hunted that animal, but he's going to play weak and ask the maid to fetch a plate and a waterproofing agent if they had any. But the maid was more worried about something else, which caught the prince's interest. She said she couldn't allow the blood of an animal to touch royal hands. Furthermore, she couldn't allow him to butcher the carcass. It might result in him cutting himself. With the knife in hand, our protagonist said it was fine. No one was watching, just to make her even more concerned. You won't be able to speak to the king right now due to political scheduling, and there's not much he can do with the other departments either. The queen is doing everything she can to make his life harder, but our protagonist is a survival expert. After all, he was trained by Hercules himself, and now that boar would be his dinner. The danger it posed was nothing to him. In the room of the resentful queen, she continues fanning the bitterness of her soul. She wants to know what the prince is up to. She noticed that ever since the protagonist woke up, he's been acting very differently. According to the doctors, the prince can barely walk. It might take a whole year for him to recover. The servant said there's no reason to doubt that information. Looking firmly at the servant, the bitter queen disagreed. That servant belongs to an assassin guild, the Black Moon. And even though she's using her services, the bitter queen still feels uneasy around her. She also added that her colleagues are mediocre. As for the prince, the very son abandoned by the king, she doesn't believe anything will change, even after all these years. She believes the heir's life is in the palm of her hand. At least, that's how things should be. But the bitter queen's insecurity is growing. That assassin has something to say to the queen. She recommended that the queen not insult her companions, regardless of their class. Hearing this, the queen pulled back, saying she was just expressing her concerns. She believes she can stop the prince's plans at any time. But if things don't go the way she's planning, someone will end up paying the price. Spilling the rest of the tea from her cup onto the floor, she dismissed the servant. The queen is becoming more and more inclined to eliminate the prince, and the servant is simply waiting for her command. Meanwhile, at the heir's residence, he and his servant are having a very pleasant dinner. The path of mana is like threading a needle through many strands. It creates a flow very carefully. At least that's how he was taught. The most difficult paths are the veins in the brain itself, and if you don't want to go blind by accident, you should pay attention to that lesson. His teacher was a priestess who liked to get drunk. She could split the ocean with a single word, and she had a great time with that training. There was also a mage so tiny that all he could see was the staff she carried. Overseeing all that training was a goddess responsible for the protagonist's health. Those people weren't just there to observe. Help would come in some form. These images came into his mind, just memories from when he began training and when he started that. The experiment he never wanted to repeat again. Outside, he was in the garden. The maid asked what he was looking for out there that day. The weather was nice and pleasant, so much so that even the forest looked more elegant. Our protagonist told the maid she could leave, and if anyone came looking for him, she should be informed. But he asked her not to overwork herself with her tasks. The good thing is that she's gradually getting used to the prince's routine. She still refuses to eat a meal with him, but she's much more at ease than before, helping him to enjoy peaceful days while he finishes his recovery. Sitting in the middle of the garden, our protagonist is preparing to begin the process. Concentrating his magic, a mana field appeared around his body. Within this field, small yellow energy spheres began to form, until they started orbiting the protagonist's body and he remained deeply focused. In that process, he's absorbing mana from nature itself. This technique is called mana breathing. He learned it from the god of mages, Odin himself. There's a limit to how much mana a body can store, which is why this training must be done daily. The miraculous part of this technique is that it allows progress that would take months to be achieved in just days. If the kingdom learned this technique, it would cause a revolution. But our protagonist has no intention of sharing that knowledge, especially because this isn't something easily achieved. He remains seated on the grass, feeling the breeze flow across his body, fully aware that there's an intruder nearby watching him. His curiosity about the intruder's identity grows. But one thing he's sure of, it must be the queen's doing. And to avoid problems, he pretends he hasn't noticed anything, because it's still advantageous for him to be seen as a foolish and weak prince. Thanks to his mana distortion field, he's able to train peacefully, and now he can store even more mana. But there's one problem. He's getting closer and closer to the moment when he'll have to do that. That damn mana circle. Priests can't use magic and mages can't use sacred power. And necromancy is a technique neither of them can wield. But as you've probably noticed by now, the protagonist can use all three powers, thanks to the efforts of those two crazy teachers and those degenerate researchers. Just thinking about the process makes the protagonist feel nauseous. Ordinary mages draw a mana circle in their hearts so they can control their own mana. Unfortunately, that method prevents them from using sacred power and necromancy. And if you try to force it, the protagonist could end up destroying his own heart. That's why he has a circle, made especially for him. Its name is the artery circle. By focusing on the arteries of his body, he's able to create a circle that helps control the mana flow. Thus, he uses his entire body for this task, achieving incredible results. The problem is that this is practically a body modification, an extremely delicate process. A single mistake could mean death. That's exactly why our protagonist wasn't eager to go through this again. The last time he attempted it, he succeeded with only a tiny margin of error, and that was with the help of his teachers. Now needing to perform the process alone, he's unsure whether he's capable. Unexpectedly, he felt hands touching his own. Right before his eyes appeared translucent figures, yet their appearances were familiar. They were his teachers. Failing certainly wouldn't be worse than spending millennia in that temple. That was exactly the motivation he needed. Our protagonist began the process. He's forging his own magical circle. The day was ending and the maid went outside to find the prince. It was already past dinner time and the protagonist was very late. Although he occasionally delays, he never misses a meal. Now the maid faces a dilemma. He asked not to be disturbed, but perhaps he needs help. She doesn't know if she should go or not. While she remains worried, the protagonist says he had already asked her not to call him Prince. Hearing the young man's voice, she was extremely surprised. Emerging from the garden, our protagonist announces he's back. He also said she shouldn't have waited for him as he previously requested. Nevertheless, it's difficult for our protagonist to resist this woman's resilience, which means he'll have to work even harder. Without warning, he hugged her, but for God's sake, the guy can't even hug properly. He left one arm dangling awkwardly. Yet even so, the maid's face turned completely red, as if she were having a stroke. Only then did the prince apologize to her, revealing that, in fact, he's reached his absolute limit. Collapsing to the ground, utterly exhausted. Now that explains the awkward hug. After arduous training in the garden, the protagonist needs plenty of rest. Our protagonist wakes up lying in his bed, realizing he'd been worried unnecessarily. While thinking about it, he noticed something different there. Something was touching his hand. That hand belonged to Amy. She had ended up sleeping beside him. Getting up, he remembered he fainted the previous day, which probably worried her greatly. And the task he was so hesitant to complete was performed perfectly. Now he has those 3 powers running through his veins. Besides the unusual circle, there's a special effect. The breeze entering from the window woke the maid. She saw the prince looking outside. A special effect is the total absence of limitations. Moving a single finger, he can cast entire spells. Noticing that the girl had woken up, he quickly wished her a good morning. After that fateful day, 5 months had passed. Amy became increasingly cheerful, mentioning she found some herbs in the garden. The protagonist isn't that surprised, since he's very satisfied with their current meals. On the other hand, the maid is extremely grateful. Exactly 3 months ago, their lives had become much easier since someone started leaving meat and vegetables at their doorstep. Initially, he suspected it could be one of the queen's tricks, but soon dismissed that possibility. Thus, another person was helping the prince, but the protagonist couldn't figure out who it was. But he is capable of using magic, and he senses a presence every time, using mana to discover where that person comes from is a simple task. While considering this, his senses picked up something else. Some people are approaching his house. Knowing this, the prince started moving. Amy was still saying they no longer have problems with food, and the prince instructed her to organize things. But the girl didn't understand that command until our protagonist clarified that guests would arrive soon. He's curious to see who these people are. A small group presented themselves. Surely they must be informants sent by the queen. They came here to assess the prince's health. He observes those men with a calm expression, knowing they don't grasp the full truth. He wanted to know what the priest thought about his condition. He asked if he'd get better soon, and the priest said his condition was fragile. It would be very risky to use sacred power on the prince's body. He should be grateful for what he's capable of doing right now, but the prince knows that priest was talking a bunch of nonsense. He didn't even use a healing spell, denying the vow he made to the goddess herself just to obey the queen. It's truly frustrating. The protagonist thinks the priest should stop trying to sound virtuous. He's not refusing to heal because he can't, but because he won't. He asked a few technical questions to the priest, all while thinking that his body is already nearing the end of its recovery. Responding to the prince, the priest said the boy speaks about things he cannot comprehend. Sacred power is something exclusive to priests, and the prince talks about it as if he understands it well. He should stop being so arrogant. With a provoking smile, the priest was about to make a mocking comment. He then compared the protagonist to one of the queen's sons. Amy scolded the priest, saying he was in the presence of the prince and should watch his words. He didn't like being corrected by a servant and tried to strike her as a form of discipline. The prince saw all of it, and he didn't like it one bit. The priest began boasting about having done something honorable, correcting a potential problem for the prince. He also said that woman didn't seem like much, and held her face in his hands, while thinking awful things about her. He said the woman had a beautiful smile, and our protagonist was holding himself back from cutting off his head right then and there. The priest said that since he came all the way here, the servant should at least escort him to the exit. He would see the prince again in 15 days. Our protagonist asked Amy to escort the priest to the exit. She wasn't very happy with that command, and the priest clearly had something malicious in mind. The prince pretended to ignore the man's ill intentions. Finally, they reached the gate. The priest told the maid to remember his words. She should come alone at night, and that the prince's life was in his hands. That priest didn't care in the slightest about what he was doing, because even though the prince was of noble blood, he was still a weak and sickly hair. The protagonist was feeling a strange sensation in his body, like he was growing colder and colder. He couldn't quite explain what he was feeling. Maybe he was just extremely angry. But he spent too much time in the Temple of Heroes to describe such a feeling in simple terms. He was taught that one is less than an animal if they can't control their emotions. But with a sword in hand, his thoughts were very different. The priests grew concerned as he approached. They didn't know he was the prince. Controlling one's rage can serve as a compass to lead toward your goals. If laziness is the key to progress, then rage is the driving force that gets things done. Those two priests were lying on the ground, likely no longer alive. Their leader continued threatening the maid, making it clear he could kill the prince. He said the prince's life was so insignificant that his death would bring great joy to the queen, and that there was no one in the kingdom on the prince's side. Not only that, there was no one with the authority to punish him, since that priest acted as the hands and feet of the queen. The protagonist waited for the speech to end and said it was very good, because he too needed an excuse to give. He then swung his sword at that priest. The man fell to the ground, completely at the mercy of the prince. Our protagonist asked his servant what the penalty was for blaspheming against the royal family. The priest didn't expect that to happen, thinking the prince was still bedridden. Our protagonist knew he was also curious about how the prince could even move his body. That's why the priest was at such a low level. They never needed that kind of mediocre power. So he asked his servant once again, reinforcing that he had already told her not to make him repeat himself. She knew exactly what the penalty was for that kind of crime. Immediate execution, and that's exactly what happened to the priest, whose head now hung from his neck. Blood dripped to the floor. The priest was in extreme agony. He said the queen would never let it end like this. The protagonist heard those words and gave a faint smile. He thanked the man for the warning, but promised him one thing: those who stand against the prince will fall as well. And with that, he finished severing the head of that fool. In the queen's hall, she said the prince was insane, because he had executed someone very important, a disciple from the Holy Land. But the prince said that man attempted to take his life, and he simply enforced the laws of the land. The bitter queen was absolutely furious. She tried to strike the protagonist, who found the situation amusing. While he was in a coma, the kingdom's laws weren't nearly as harsh, not even enough to investigate what had happened to him. The prince said that even after all that, the king remained silent, and all he had done was punish someone who had blasphemed against the royal family. It made no sense for the victim to be punished for his own actions. He asked the queen when exactly the royal family became inferior to low-ranking disciples. The bitter queen didn't like that provocation, because the prince had just diminished the value of her followers. She claimed there was no proof, and that the prince shouldn't judge things with his empty head. She said he was as stupid as his own mother. Those words only made the protagonist angry. She kept pushing, saying both he and his mother were inferior beings. Exuding a bit of his dark intent, our protagonist had a bit of advice for her. It's not wise to curse someone's parents, especially not in front of that person. The energy was so dense that the queen fell backward. Daggers were drawn along with other weapons as well. Her maids were trained and ready to defend the bitter queen. One of them was already behind the prince. That presence felt familiar. Our protagonist said it would have been more interesting if the queen had actually tried harder, hammering nails into someone's coffin, whether it's the queen's or anyone else's. Attempting to take the life of a royal is no different from any other major crime. After that comment, the bitter queen fell into deep thought because she realized the protagonist knows who was behind the attempt on his life. Looking at her, he smiled faintly. He had always known. He wasn't the kind of person to keep that card hidden for long. Ever since she slapped a patient across the face, it was clear the queen didn't hold much consideration for anyone. He told her to behave properly inside his palace since, as she could see, the building was in poor condition. After all, it was the queen who removed all the servants from that place, and he expected her to provide the necessary maintenance immediately. Otherwise, rumors might start to spread. He advised the queen to think the matter over very carefully, because he wasn't going to stay quiet if she kept acting the same way. Back in her quarters, the queen was smashing objects in a fury. Her maid stood by, waiting for her to calm down. But the bitter queen hated being looked down upon by a half-blood. It filled her with a rage beyond normal. And so she began plotting against our protagonist. Since he seemed so eager to accelerate his own death, she would gladly help with that. He had no idea who he was dealing with. At the castle, people were talking. The rumors were true. Rumors about the prince, who, after waking from his coma, seemed to have had his mind altered. Amy, passing by, ended up overhearing those things. After the events with the priest and the queen, everything happened just as planned. Gossip was spreading about the prince, claiming he had completely lost his mind. Since many in the palace support the queen, his reputation was being rapidly destroyed. With joy in her eyes, Amy asked the prince to come see what had arrived. They had received even more. He said he didn't need all those medicinal herbs, but Amy was deeply thankful for the donations. There must be someone who truly understands the prince's good intentions. He asked his maid if his personality seemed that good to her. Overflowing with enthusiasm, she couldn't deny that she really did see him as exceptional. Our protagonist found it strange how she remained so optimistic, even after he had killed someone right before her eyes. She truly was an incredible person, hard to find. While they were together, A man approached, politely asking for their attention. This elder was named Besfus. He had brought the sinners to the prince, as the queen had ordered. These were the ones responsible for diverting the prince's funds, among them a few familiar faces. The prince asked how this kind of crime is usually punished. The old man replied that it depended on the prince, but it generally involved decapitation. Immediately, those who had previously scorned the protagonist began begging for their lives. He said that recently a rumor had been going around the palace, supposedly. They were saying the prince had developed an intense bloodlust. At least, that's what people were claiming. Maybe he should act accordingly to that rumor. After scaring them a bit, the begging became even more desperate. They were all utterly terrified. Without saying another word, he told the elder to take care of it. Those people would be arrested, but it didn't please our protagonist that it happened under the queen's initiative. He decided to go along with it, as the situation had become a bit more interesting. Those people would be beheaded in 9 days. Back in his quarters, he also ordered Amy to be promoted, and for a bonus to be added to her salary. He had another question to ask, whether the audience with his father was still not permitted. The old man apologized, and our protagonist wanted to know if that was a command from the king or the queen. But the old man replied that he was just a messenger. He asked the boy to be patient, as the kingdom was in a delicate situation. The prince understood exactly what those words meant. He said he would keep that in mind. The old man believed he could leave, but the prince still had something else to say to him. He was eating everything that had been sent to his home. However, it wasn't necessary for the old man to keep sending medicinal herbs, and since things had changed, there was no need to send food either. The old man began to smile. He said he didn't know what the prince was talking about, but it seemed like he had been blessed. He said the prince would soon be receiving guests and needed to go. Our protagonist was surprised at how much the old man knew about the palace. He then began to wonder about the old man's nature, because he had played the fool even though all the evidence was right there. Besfus is the head of all those who serve the king. When he was younger, the protagonist used to see him often. He hadn't expected the old man to be on his side. Then he remembered something the old man had said, that the prince would have visitors soon. And so it happened. Amy had a message for the prince. She told him that the fourth and second princes were there. The two rushed for the protagonist like wild animals, throwing themselves at him. The little one is named Winley. She is the second princess. Because she knocked over our protagonist, she became very worried, wanting to know if he didn't know who she was, since he wouldn't use mana to spy on his maid. The other person said the girl should have been more careful. That boy is named Barris, and he had already been wanting to meet the prince. The king and the protagonist's father is a man addicted to love. At the moment, he has 3 wives, the queen and 2 concubines, Alice and Anisha. Alice is aligned with the queen's intentions, while Anisha chose to remain neutral, staying distant from the other wives. Barris and Winley are the children of this woman, which makes them the protagonist's siblings. While the boy apologized for what happened, the girl noticed something. She was about to act suddenly. She tried to kick her brother in the head, but the boy managed to dodge the attack. He asked why the girl was doing that. She was very irritated by her brother's behavior, who was acting far too formally and strangely. After all, it was he who had been so eager to meet the prince. The two began to argue heatedly, showing that they truly are siblings, prompting our protagonist to observe the whole discussion. He'd heard they had been taking care of a group of thieves. Maybe it was true, and looking at them closely, they hardly looked like royalty. After a long argument between them, they turned their attention to our protagonist. They were still the siblings who always listened to everything he had to say. The girl was annoyed because the prince had started laughing at their argument. It had been 6 years since the last time they talked. After the prince fell into a coma, they were sent to a remote area. They were only 8 years old at the time and couldn't do much during difficult times. Besides that, Anisha had sent her first daughter to a foreign kingdom. Due to the Bitter Queen's schemes, she had to protect her children. Our protagonist doesn't realize how hard it was to make those decisions, and not everyone is able to understand that. He asked if his siblings had spoken to their father. They said they had met with him before coming to the prince. Our protagonist wanted to know how the king was doing. The brother said he seemed a little tired, and the girl noticed that he still hadn't seen his father. Our protagonist knows it might be difficult, but he'll be able to meet him soon. On the way to the prince's residence, they saw something that needed to be said. The condition of that place was truly pitiful. He said some people had been embezzling the budget, but those people had already been captured. Hearing this, his brother became very upset. He couldn't accept that something like this had been done to his sibling. It was unacceptable that money had been stolen from a sick person. They were going to speak to the king, but our protagonist asked them not to tire themselves with that. His brother looked like he was about to take action, but he suddenly stopped after realizing what he had heard from the prince. The protagonist seemed quite calm and stated he would take care of his own matters. The reunion with his siblings made him happier. He hadn't realized there were so many people on his side, though maybe it was just his imagination. He continued chatting casually with his siblings, and it seems the girl has some potential for magic. And once again, they went back to discussing trivial matters. His brother also has a talent for swordsmanship. Despite their frequent arguments, they are gifted. After hearing those words, he learned about a swordsmanship competition, which left his siblings worried. They didn't want the prince to learn about that information, not like this, and now they were arguing again. Then the young man composed himself again, presenting a small envelope to the prince. That swordsmanship competition takes place every 5 years, and this time it will be hosted in the kingdom of Polisti. The protagonist knows the purpose of the competition is to promote harmony between the continents, like the Greek Olympics. Reading the letter's contents, he saw that there are various categories ranging from mercenaries to royalty. His brother said the prince should take the chance while he still can, as he's never left that kingdom. And for that reason, he made a request to their father. The girl hopes they can all go together. The kingdom of Polisti is known as the City of Waters, and it must be a very beautiful place. The protagonist starts thinking a bit more about his siblings' proposal, only to realize they had already gone back to arguing. Our protagonist stated that there was nothing he could do about it now, because he could never turn down a request from his twin brothers. They began to celebrate energetically, and the prince asked them not to destroy his house. It was good to see them so happy, and Barris was right about one thing. The protagonist had never left the palace, and it wouldn't be bad for him to enjoy an event in that world, even if only once, because this is an opportunity to be explored, where he might also be able to have a little fun, and he started wishing the journey would begin for them soon. Other people are also learning about this swordsmanship competition. Barris is about to turn 14, and he's almost becoming an adult too. They know the twins must be talking to the prince right now, but the elder asked them not to worry, as the prince is becoming an exemplary person. He is calm and gifted with great perception, and the elder was very surprised to see how much he had changed. To the mysterious man, the elder's judgment was more than enough, and the one who seems to be the love-addicted king finds this situation a bit sad. A photo of the former queen had been placed on the furniture. The protagonist looked at his mother's photo with great joy. Until now, he had been ignoring the state the palace was in. Thanks to the elder's help, the building was restored very quickly. Amy also appreciated the renovation. She couldn't believe the day had finally come, and the protagonist noticed her interest was a bit too peculiar. Maybe he had pressured her too much, but Amy was happy that things were going well. Then they asked the prince if he was ready, because the time for the journey was drawing near. Our protagonist asked Amy to take care of that bottle for him. Now they were ready to depart. They're heading toward the kingdom of Polisti, the City of Waters. This competition is an event that draws the world's attention and holds great influence. Since his brother is going to compete, the prince was able to go with him, even though he's supposedly ill. If Barris performs well in the competition, the jealous prince's reputation will take a hit. The queen agreed to let the concubine's son participate, as if she were confident he would fail. It's as if she were planning to sabotage him somehow. The king also attended the event and is being welcomed as a dignitary. That was the first time the protagonist had seen the king since he woke up. It's as if for the past 6 months, the king had been avoiding his own son. The king ordered them to raise their heads. He wanted to know if his son felt confident. The young man said he did, and that he would do his best to represent his king well. And the king wished for his safe return. After that, the two spoke for a while, but then the king noticed someone looking directly at the first heir, who was also staring back at him firmly. Without showing any reaction, the king turned his back on the boy, but said it was very good to know that he was healthy. The protagonist's sister had noticed that. The prince had no intention of spending his emotions now, but he wasn't surprised by his father's current condition. They were saying that Barris's participation in this competition was of great importance to the entire kingdom. They would celebrate it. Our protagonist saw that the king had changed a lot. There was no trace of his former heroism or confidence. He looked more like an old lion tired of his own duties. After that ceremony, they were already inside the carriage. Barris said the trip might be boring, but elite guards had been hired to protect them, and asked if the protagonist was bothered by anything. His only concern was that the journey would be tedious, since everyone was worried about his health. The girl said that since they received that wine from the protagonist, the trip would be much smoother. Barris scolded her, telling her to be careful with the drink. But it was her first time tasting something so good, and she asked where the protagonist had gotten it. He didn't even know, because that bottle had been left by his mother. His siblings were worried about consuming something so precious, but the protagonist didn't care because it was made to be enjoyed, and they should do so on a special day like that one. They realized the prince had changed a lot. He used to be very protective of the things his mother left behind. Our protagonist didn't expect them to have such good memories. Either way, they went back to celebrating, and so the carriage continued toward its destination. At night, they stopped to camp and would continue the journey at sunrise. The trip would last one more day. Barris was worried about the prince, since it was his first time camping. He said he was fine and asked where Winley was. He was told she had gone for a walk. Apparently, she had drunk quite a bit. Our protagonist apologized for the wine. Then they remember that the protagonist used to say he wanted to camp like that, and they were doing their best to keep the stop brief, so they wouldn't put too much strain on the prince's body. The whole journey was being handled more cautiously as he was being treated like a patient. Our protagonist realized that some things change with time, while others remained just as they've always been, and he was grateful to be with his siblings. Then he said goodnight to the boy who was heading to his cabin. Amy asked if the prince wasn't going to rest as well, but he was entertained looking at the sky. The moon was more beautiful than usual. With the branch in hand, he began making a few movements. He said it was the perfect opportunity to make his return, and asked what Amy thought of that. Pointing to the sky, he said the red moon is called Cyrus and the blue one is Creas. That's what the guard said. The red one begins to shine as the blue one fades. This is common knowledge there, a story even children know. He admitted that he should have conversations like that beside a woman. Another guard approached him to ask who he was talking to alone, but he didn't know he was speaking with someone else. The prince just watched from afar, because it was he who had spoken to the guard, whom now believed he had talked to a ghost. His siblings had hired 5 guards in total, 4 of them elite warriors. That should be enough for safety, as long as nothing serious happens. Like being attacked by a group of assassins, our protagonist knew they were being followed by approximately 20. They would likely attack once everyone fell asleep and were very good at covering their tracks. A great opportunity for the queen to eliminate all of them. She would never ignore a chance like that. The protagonist wasn't happy about it as it risked revealing his true nature. But when he thought more deeply about it, none of that really mattered, because the people who would witness his power wouldn't live to tell. If you have no teeth, bite with your gums. That's what his sword master taught him. Whatever he holds in his hands becomes a weapon. There are no rules in a fight for survival. Weapons are an extension of the body. Depending on how they're handled, even clothes can become excellent swords. Our protagonist realized those assassins were weaker than expected. They didn't even come close to Hermessa, the one who had trained him. In the end, it was nothing more than a boring distraction, and he was only going to ask that to confirm it, because he knows it was the bitter queen who sent them to die. Even so, his enemies kept their composure. If they don't want to answer questions, the prince won't force them, because that won't change what already happened. But he would like to know what the queen hoped to gain with that attack, since it would shake the kingdom. Even, she would have a hard time with that. It's as if there's a hidden reason behind her confidence in launching such an attack. Our protagonist proceeds to dismantle his aggressors. He noticed that some of them hadn't fled yet. Apparently, he didn't understand the seriousness of the situation. He ordered that a message be sent to the queen. He will destroy everything she has, even if she stops bothering him. The assassins hesitated for a moment, but knowing they would be executed, they fled the area, leaving the prince completely alone. The boy had a smile on his face and asked if the assassins were running just because he gave the order. He said it was nothing more than a cheap provocation. Using a secret technique, he executed the last ones still alive and began mocking their intelligence, which had fallen for that setup. The most important trait for an assassin is patience. If there's no one left to witness it, it's an assassination, so they should remember that. As he said those words, 2 other assassins tried to attack him, but it was useless to try and strike the protagonist from behind. The problem is, one of them really did try to escape, while the others tried to buy a little time. But the protagonist finished them off effortlessly. He said his enemies weren't worth more than the branch he used as a weapon. He pointed his finger toward a spot deep in the forest. His vision had locked onto an object. He had prepared it as soon as he learned about the ambush. There's no way his target could escape his eyes. All it took was a snap of his fingers, and the assassin was caught in a soul explosion technique. That technique was a bit brutal, but fitting for the context. He shouldn't show mercy to anyone who tries to take his life. That's how they taught him at the Temple of Heroes. It was a fitting end for all of them. A perfect assassination, the author of that act would never be discovered, and that's what made it perfect. The bitter queen was anxious to know how the assassin's mission had gone, but the servant had no good news to deliver. The candles tied to her pupils' lives had been completely extinguished. The queen realized that all of the assassins had been slaughtered. Then she asked how those royal bastards were doing. She learned that all of them had arrived safely at their destination. Faced with the assassin's incompetence, the bitter queen slapped the woman across the face. She said they were useless fools who couldn't take care of a few children in a handful of nights. How could 20 assassins have been defeated? They're still investigating everything, and from the looks of it, someone is helping the prince. But the queen doesn't know who could be assisting those bastards. and that only makes her even more enraged. She ordered the assassin to find out who that helper is because she will direct her wrath toward him, making it clear to the assassin that she isn't working with them to collect failures. And if next time the result isn't what she wants, she will terminate her contract and use all the power of the crown to wipe out the Black Moon once and for all. The servant said she will remember those words. Inside the carriage, they can already see the kingdom of Pallistia on the horizon. The twins soon begin to argue, while our protagonist is relieved that they have reached their destination. It's a small kingdom, roughly the size of Singapore, for comparison, but it's full of historic streets and is one of the most beautiful places on the entire continent. Our protagonist is admiring the beauty of the place. His brother noticed that he seems very happy to be in that country. A large building stands before them, almost like a coliseum. That's where the swordsmanship competition will take place. That place is usually used for battles between gladiators and monsters, and now it will host this competition, which will involve 8 countries in total. In the end, thought our protagonist, it's just a way for countries to show off their military strength to each other. Not everyone there is excited about the competition, since all the participants are under 20 years old. Not all of them are talented. Nearby, the princess pointed out that the representative of the Kingdom of Round is that idiot she's accompanying. Our protagonist found it amusing that they keep arguing, but he knows his brother's skills are only intermediate. He's close to becoming a master. It's truly impressive for someone so young. The representative from the Kingdom of Fallon is the famous Sword Princess. Our protagonist doesn't know who she is, and his sister said that everyone in the kingdom knows this person. Apparently, someone new appeared during his coma. Belinda of Fallon is the only princess of her king and has 9 brothers. She is also the crown's favorite. But the protagonist's brother said her fame isn't only due to being the sole princess. She is famous for being the wielder of the divine sword, the sword favored by God, a masterpiece that took 1,000 days and 1,000 nights to complete, also called calderas. It's been a while since the protagonist last heard that name, because the sword god Hares was his first teacher at the Temple of Heroes. Although genuinely lazy, he was highly skilled, and the protagonist had often heard the name of the sword he used. It was with that very weapon that the Demon King was defeated, so it's only natural that he would leave his mark there in some way. Even so, our protagonist still feels a little strange. A girl had passed by the protagonist and decided to look back. They asked her what happened. Trying to hide what she felt, she said it was nothing important. The divine sword has never been damaged, and it is capable of manifesting magic because it holds a spirit within, cultivated by its creators and by those who wield it. It's not called the divine sword for nothing, and after many centuries, it chose Elena as its wielder. But there is another reason why this princess is also famous. Something equally important, and that cannot be ignored. She was one of the most beautiful women on the continent. Our protagonist was pleased with that information, because to him, that's the only part that really matters. Later that day, our protagonist asked if there wasn't another outfit, because he didn't like the one Amy had chosen, but the girl was hopelessly impressed. Even if he didn't like the outfit, he was a representative of the kingdom and needed to be well dressed. That event wasn't just for the competition, the royal family had other interests. Finally, the protagonist met up with his siblings. The twins really liked the outfit he was wearing. The boy told the protagonist not to compliment the girl too much, or she might start believing it. Right after that, she almost crushed his foot. While the boy tried to recover from the pain, the protagonist left with his sister. They were heading to a gala ball, and once again that mysterious girl found herself distracted. She complained a little about the noise, but she was looking in the protagonist's direction. The event was the perfect opportunity for the new generation of nobles to meet each other. The mysterious woman said the place wasn't bad, and although the Colosseum was barbaric, it was very beautiful. A grand banquet was being served in honor of the competition. Inside the hall, the nobles were getting to know one another better. Our protagonist observed those who were likely participants. They all looked very young due to the age restriction. Even though the attendants were a bit older, they still looked very young. And among them, someone stood out as being noticeably more popular. Barris at that exact moment was being approached by several people. It seemed that many girls were quite interested in him. Judging by his abilities, that was to be expected. They should take advantage of the moment and learn more about their potential rivals. Willie also seemed to be getting a lot of attention. Our protagonist found the event to be very lively. He even thought about helping his brother in some way, because the boy clearly wanted some kind of support and was heartbroken to see that he had been completely ignored by the prince. Little did he know, the prince wanted the young man to enjoy life a bit. Apparently, loving too much is a trait the protagonist inherited from his father. Winley had been waiting for the day she could dance with her brother. He didn't know the girl danced too, but she had to learn being of royal blood. The girl wanted to know why the prince seemed upset. If it weren't for his current condition, he could have participated in the competition too because he was also talented. Our protagonist said that she puts him on a pedestal. Talent is nothing more than an illusion. Without hard work, talent becomes meaningless. And that kind of attention is not something he's looking for, because it doesn't matter to him. The protagonist's dream is to live life without worries. His sister said he sounded like an old man saying things like that, until someone approached them wanting to meet with Princess Winley. Taken by jealousy, our protagonist wanted to know who that skinny bastard was, and he was surprised that the man knew his sister. By the look on the girl's face, it wasn't a pleasant encounter. Even so, he approached the princess, pushing the protagonist aside, because he really wanted to talk with her for a bit. She said she couldn't do that, as she was in the middle of a conversation with her brother. The young man didn't deny being upset, and apologized for the lack of manners. He introduced himself to our protagonist. His name is Boltus, the 7th prince of his kingdom. Let's just call this rare gem Cheerful Fool. The protagonist was about to introduce himself, but the Cheerful Fool already knew who he was. Even though he knows his identity, our protagonist doesn't seem impressed. The Cheerful Fool asked what brought the prince there, and our protagonist said he came to watch his brother in the competition. But he was surprised that the Cheerful Fool pushed him even knowing he was a prince. The extra wished the prince an enjoyable stay, and turned his attention back to Princess Winley. He said he wants to win the competition and dedicate his victory to her, but she found that unnecessary and rude to the other participants. And the Cheerful Fool said it wouldn't be rude as long as he wins the competition. She said her twin brother will also participate, and making such promises belittles the boy's talent. Pulling the prince by the arm, she left the Cheerful Fool behind. Our protagonist felt pleased, realizing his sister can take care of herself. But he didn't like the extra's behavior one bit, who definitely wouldn't let things end like that. Approaching the princess, he asked if she was belittling his presence. Our protagonist realized the guy was being too aggressive, and he had tested the limits of the protagonist's patience. He stuck out his foot so that he would trip. While holding him in place with just one hand in a discreet manner, our protagonist said his hand had slipped, and warned the Cheerful Fool not to lay a hand on his precious sister. He should consider himself lucky for leaving without any broken bones, since that would ruin his participation in the competition. But the Cheerful Fool was even more outraged at being humiliated. He clenched his fists and slapped the protagonist's face with a glove. At first, he was confused by the gesture, but he was being challenged to a duel by the Cheerful Fool, who clearly hadn't been humiliated enough. His sister tried to step in, and the Cheerful Fool told her to stay out of it, because he had to do this for his honor as a knight. But a woman said he was just making a scene in that place. Everyone knew who that blonde was. She had seen it all happen and had a question for the Cheerful Fool. And to the protagonist's complete surprise, she asked whether the Cheerful Fool had the right to reclaim the honor he lost. She was Haris, the sword goddess Haris, hero of a fallen empire, who became one of the great powers of that continent. It said she was the original wielder of the sword Caldaris and creator of a lost swordsmanship technique called Claymore. Those who mastered that technique could create tsunamis with the swing of their blades, and our protagonist quickly thought she might be Haris. But in fact, she is Princess Ileana of the Fallen Empire. Her appearance started to cause a bit of a stir. Our protagonist was also quite shaken. He was amazed that the princess looked so much like Haris, because he was sure Haris was a man. Strange that now she's a woman. It seemed that instead of just thinking it, he had said it out loud. Standing face to face with him, the princess wanted to know what he was saying. She was so close that he was feeling a bit uncomfortable. He said he was mistaken. Even so, the princess stared at him with intensity, while our protagonist claimed to have forgotten what he was saying. He had no idea how things got to that point. Even his brother came over to see what was going on. The princess turned her attention back to the Cheerful Fool, saying he was disrespecting everyone there. The one known as the Emperor's Forbidden Treasure was truly impressive because she was charismatic. And she said that if the Cheerful Fool truly valued his honor as a knight, he should apologize to those two guests. But he was full of rage from being humiliated. Our protagonist figured that someone so prideful wouldn't apologize so easily, and he saw in that a great opportunity. Before the Cheerful Fool could apologize, he confirmed that he accepted the duel. That statement left his sister very worried, but our protagonist wasn't going to let the Cheerful Fool escape his wrath. The princess said the fight was pointless, but the protagonist replied that it was up to him to decide whether to accept it or not. And he asked if Happy Fool really wanted a duel, because if it's a beating he's looking for, then a beating is what he'll get. It had been a while since he last wielded a wooden sword. His brother was very worried, since his opponent was someone who would be participating in the fencing competition, but he told his siblings not to be afraid because of that. Happy Fool said he was just an amateur, and that he should quit before causing problems for his own brothers. If he were to kneel before Happy Fool, he would forgive the protagonist's offenses. That only made his brother even angrier, but the prince said it was fine. because actions speak much louder than words, and he asked if Happy Fool agreed with him. The extra said that if he lost, he would kneel and admit defeat. Given that promise, our protagonist warned him not to regret it later. Finally, the two could begin their fight. Our protagonist was thinking about the best way to handle the situation, because he was still acting like someone who had been in a coma for 6 years, and he didn't want to show his full potential there. Maintaining a completely carefree posture, Happy Fool asked if he was scared. He had been waiting for the prince to make the first move, and he had just wasted a great opportunity. Soon, an excellent idea formed our protagonist's mind. He said he wouldn't hold back in that fight, charging fiercely at Happy Fool. The boy was surprised by the speed and saw the protagonist's sword being handled with great mastery. Deliberately, he dropped a weapon. Happy Fool thought he had found an opening to counterattack, but was struck before he could even realize it. The lights were on, but no one was home. Happy Fool lost consciousness for a moment. His sword flew through the air, while the protagonist acted like a fool, pretending not to know what had happened, and asked if Happy Fool had really been hit by that, asking why he allowed himself to be struck first. The other nobles noticed he was being humiliated and that there was a clear gap in their skill levels. That only fueled the extra's fury even more, and he wanted to take the protagonist to life. Smiling, he said that with Happy Fool's skill level, taking the life might be a little impossible. They continued to exchange several sword blows. The fight was more difficult than Happy Fool had expected. He was being pressured non-stop. He noticed the protagonist's stance was terrible, and he could barely control his own strength. Even so, it was still incredibly difficult. He believed he wouldn't allow himself to be defeated, as he was too proud. The problem was that Happy Fool was skilled with the sword and knew his own limits. Realizing that the protagonist was about to land a brutal blow, the hit landed and he couldn't understand why it had happened. The nobles in the hall watched the unexpected result of that duel. Happy Fool was on the ground, apparently defeated, and our protagonist apologized for hitting him once again. Happy Fool still wasn't tired of being humiliated. He believed he could provide a little more entertainment, but he started to hear what the nobles were saying. The so-called prodigy had already been hit 3 times. Maybe he wasn't as talented as the rumors claimed. Filled with rage, he punched the ground, saying the nobles didn't know anything. Even so, he didn't have the courage to stand up again. Our protagonist knew that Happy Fool was completely blinded by anger, and that's why he had learned that fencing technique. The correct name of the technique was Drunken Sword. As the name suggests, it's as if the user were drunk. It was invented by the biggest drunk among all heroes, the great, the idolized, the most brilliant Dokgo Jun. And the sword god found that technique very interesting because it was unpredictable and dangerous. That's why the protagonist ended up learning it. Watching the boy learn it, its creator realized just how dangerous it really was and started laughing at his own conclusion. The sword god warned that the technique shouldn't be used carelessly, only against those who truly deserve to be buried. The protagonist needed to have some awareness. Even the creators of that technique regarded it as a serious taboo, perhaps because it was too powerful and because of its unpredictability. None of those factors were the real reason behind the concern. It was how the style was deeply tied to deception and manipulation of the opponent. The goal of the style wasn't to protect someone, nor to take lives, but simply to humiliate the opponent in front of everyone. Despite that intention, the style is incredibly effective. The only problem is that the opponent ends up being heavily provoked in the process. Once again, with great skill, our protagonist made the cheerful fool fall to the ground. The larger the audience, the more effective this technique is. Exactly like what's happening now. Our protagonist said he doesn't know if he's just lucky or if his opponent is truly that bad. He's thoroughly enjoying the moment since that style of fencing suits him very well. The princess continues to observe the match closely until the cheerful fool's sword began to glow. His eyes looked threatening. He had already lost himself through his own rage. He declared he would end the protagonist's life immediately. The match suddenly became much more dangerous. That was a spirit sword, and the protagonist's siblings were frightened. But the cheerful fool said it was too late for regrets. Our protagonist knows that if any more coincidences happen, he'll start raising suspicion. On top of that, he feels a cold gaze watching him at all times. The cheerful fool managed to get close to the prince. He thought he had caught the boy off guard. He aimed to strike his head with the tip of his blade, but it didn't go as he expected. He couldn't understand what was happening. Only then did he realize the protagonist had dodged it. He kept staring at the protagonist, still not understanding what was going on. Our protagonist managed to intertwine his leg with the cheerful fool's, and things began to turn upside down. The poor boy tried to recover from the fall. The cheerful fool tried to say it was completely useless, but was taken by surprise by the wooden sword. Our protagonist started complaining about back pain. He said he had lost his balance and fallen on his own. The nobles didn't understand what had just happened either. However, the cheerful fool had been disarmed, and it looked like he had lost that duel. The nobles were disappointed with the cheerful fool's performance, but impressed by what the protagonist had shown. They knew the boy had been in a coma for several years, and he said he was just very lucky in that duel. They even joked that he must have used up all of his luck in that moment. The cheerful fool still hadn't gathered the courage to stand up, and the princess was observing everything that had happened. That really was quite a show, but she wasn't pleased. She considered the whole thing nonsense and was leaving the hall. Too bad for her if she has pity for a bum. The cheerful fool had it coming. The servants tried to stop the princess from leaving. Our protagonist, addicted to love, thought the princess was very cold, and that only made her more interesting to him. Already in the carriage, he was being scolded for his reckless behavior. Thanks to that duel, he had caused quite a scene. He tried to reassure his brothers, saying that in the end, everything had worked out. But the boy warned that the protagonist was lucky. His opponent might have a poor attitude, but his skills were supposed to be decent. He had seen a display of those skills when they first met. Since then, he hadn't stopped chasing the princess, who finds the guy quite annoying. In the end, the protagonist's plan had gone smoothly. His brothers asked what plan, but he changed the subject. And his brother insisted he was just lucky, hoping it wouldn't happen again. But the boy couldn't finish his sentence because the protagonist was crushing his hand. He asked where the prince got that absurd strength from, and the prince asked not to be treated like a patient, but he promised to follow his younger brother's advice. Eventually, the truth about the protagonist will come out. The princess is also very relieved and happy that her brother proved to be amazing, that he managed to catch the cheerful fool off guard a few times. And indeed, that clown never expected to be defeated so thoroughly. To close the evening, fireworks lit up the sky. But among the crowd, one person remained extremely angry, a cheerful fool who wouldn't stop breaking furniture. The servants tried to calm him down, but their efforts were completely useless. He couldn't believe he had been humiliated like that in front of everyone. The boy is so full of himself that he believes there are very few things in the world he can't have. And he began to think about the princess of the kingdom of Round. The truth is that he has another kind of interest in her. He chose her as a fiancé because her future brother-in-law is skilled with the sword. After speaking with the queen, he believed the marriage would really happen. But after what he did, things became much more complicated. Completely devastated, he ordered the servants not to approach him, and continued tossing furniture through the air, proving he's a complete emotional wreck, someone worthy of pity. At last, his body was exhausted after the long humiliation. Now he was physically drained, and he promised that he would end the life of the person responsible for humiliating him. A voice from the shadows asked if he truly wanted to kill someone. He didn't know who that person was, but they repeated the same question once again. Irritated, Happy Fool demanded to know who was speaking. The shadow formed a mysterious arm and said she could help this handsome guy kill that person. It seemed the poor Happy Fool had been enchanted. The shadow would help him bring a painful end to the protagonist's life. He just wanted to know the name of that mysterious being. She said her name was Sherio, and hopes he remembers that name since he asked so many times. For all practical purposes, she'll be referred to here as the Smoke Weirdo. Happy Fool was completely lost in that woman's gaze. He approached her as if he were under a spell. The Smoke Weirdo found it delightful. Revealing fangs inside her mouth, she said she'd take care of the rest, and Happy Fool could do whatever he wanted from then on. At dawn the next day, the Colosseum was ready. Our protagonist was informed that his brother would soon participate in the competition. He would fight shortly. He continued practicing to increase his mana. There was still a long road ahead, and the servant was watching him. Our protagonist said it was nothing. He was just talking to himself, but that they should go now, since some things can wait. Barris was already in the arena, fully prepared. In the stands, his sister was already ready to cheer for him. Inside one of the Colosseum rooms was a thoughtful person. It was Happy Fool himself, and there was a sinister smile on his face. It seemed he wanted to be humiliated once again. The crowd appeared to be very interested in the start of the competition, and inside the arena, a contestant was introducing himself. Our protagonist noticed that the audience seemed very engaged. He didn't want to watch amateur matches and arrived just before his brother's fight, saying he woke up feeling a bit off. His sister had already saved him a seat in the shade. She asked if his health had improved. She assumed it was because he had overexerted himself the day before, but he couldn't tell her the truth, that he had a case of explosive diarrhea. He still gets sick because he hasn't fully mastered his mana. Once that happens, goodbye diarrhea. Sometimes it just happens, but if it gets worse, he'll have to use sacred power to heal himself. Finally, Barris had entered the arena. The protagonist noticed that his brother seemed loved by the audience, so he went to see who his opponent would be. It really wasn't what he was expecting. That duel setup turned out to be a bit cruel, because he would be facing Happy Fool. The blades were dulled and fatal strikes were prohibited in that competition. Competitors could be penalized for imbuing their swords with mana, so they had to be careful. Happy Fools seemed to have paid attention to the rules, and our protagonist noticed that the audience was truly invested in the match. The princess was worried about her brother because he could get hurt if he got too carried away. But our protagonist said that Barris was very experienced and that he'd be just fine. Besides, he has insurance in this match, but the princess didn't understand what that meant. The referee ordered both competitors to step forward. All around the arena, a protective barrier was being conjured, and the young men were ready to begin the duel. Finally, the referee gave the signal for the duel to begin. Both warriors charged in for the attack. Our protagonist noticed that Happy Fool also had some kind of talent. While his brother used brute strength to deliver passive damage, comparing their styles, Barris had the advantage. Additionally, it was likely that Happy Fool wouldn't be able to withstand Barris's heavy blows. He would certainly try to avoid direct combat, but something unexpected was happening. Happy Fool had a smug smile on his face. He had managed to block the first attack, and now he began to pressure the protagonist's brother. The audience was enjoying it as the warriors fought fiercely. While the crowd was in awe, our protagonist sensed that something was off. Happy Fool's progress had been far too quick. From one day to the next, he had improved a lot. Using all that power would push him to his limit sooner or later. From his grip on the sword, the protagonist was able to sense other things. It was all very strange, and he was feeling something off about that fight. On top of that, he had never seen his brother move so quickly in battle. It was possible that he was improving right there during the duel. Watching his brother's progress made the protagonist want to train as well, because it was very pleasant to see that his brother had gotten better. When he was younger, he wanted to become a knight. Maybe that's why he invited the prince to the competition, to show him how much he had improved over the years. And now it's clear that he's put a lot of effort and dedication into it. What can't be explained is the progress of the cheerful fool. He couldn't have mastered that sword technique in such a short time as if he were a completely different person. Not to mention the strange feeling the protagonist has, which is also dangerous. He stood up suddenly, startling his sister, as if he had sensed that something was about to happen. Barris is fighting very well. He hadn't expected the cheerful fool to resist his sword techniques, acknowledging that he's persistent and a good opponent, even if his moves are unpredictable. Now he's going to end this duel, because he wants to see if his opponent can withstand this final strike. He charged at the cheerful fool to finish the match. The extra waited patiently for his opponent to approach. Barris was just about to strike him with the blade, which was already on a collision course with the cheerful fool's skull. But as he got closer, he saw a terrifying smile. Barris wasn't expecting that. He had to redirect his own attack because it was as if his opponent was trying to die. That put him in a vulnerable position. He tried to strike the cheerful fool once more, but something unexpected happened. His opponent was using mana. That surprise attack couldn't be avoided, and the tip of the sword began to pierce his chest. Barris realized he might have to use a wooden replacement forever. The night before, the protagonist's brother had been practicing. He executed his movements with great precision and mastery. The prince said he was practicing his fencing very well. He had gone outside because he couldn't sleep from the noise his brother was making. So he went to check on how his brother was training. Barris hadn't been able to sleep because of the competition. Then he reminded the protagonist about the cheerful fool. Even though his brother had defeated him, he wasn't satisfied with that, and was sure he would destroy him with his own hands. The prince told him not to worry because he was certain his brother would perform very well in the competition. While he was training, he started reading a book. His brother's posture was smooth and clean, with an honest and equally smooth mana flow. He began to wonder if he should help him a little. That method would certainly cause a stir if revealed, but the protagonist wouldn't hesitate to teach his own brother. Barris felt something approaching, but it was only the hands of our protagonist. He said he was just going to give him a massage. He asked him to close his eyes and relax during it. Without him realizing it, the protagonist was manipulating his mana channels. That would definitely cause a little pain. Barris soon felt the pain in the massage. Masking what was really happening, our protagonist said his brother was very tense. The massage was so painful that the boy wanted it to be over quickly, but the protagonist warned it wasn't finished yet. He was stimulating his brother's mana with his own, which forced that reaction. It might seem simple, but this method is completely unknown in that world. He mentioned to his brother that he knows a place where people give amazing massages, striking the boy's back with an open palm while saying something in another language. Barris became curious about those words, without realizing what was really going on. A hand strike was the closing move of the entire process. The boy collapsed to the ground, completely exhausted, while his brother felt fulfilled. Because he had managed to make his brother's mana flow more quickly, maybe it wouldn't help in the next day's battle, but it would help him grow faster. That gave the protagonist another idea. He told his brother to get up quickly or he might get sick sleeping out there. With that touch, he handed him something similar to a kind of insurance. Barris was a bit annoyed with the way his brother does things, but our protagonist told him he cares for him more than he realizes. He recommended the boy go to bed now or he'd give him the full massage. That was enough to make him vanish. Barris was already heading toward his room, completely unaware of the magic circle that had been placed on his body. That was the protagonist's guarantee regarding his brother's safety. The cheerful fool's blade wasn't able to pierce the boy, because it was blocked by the magic circle. Its power was so strong that it sent the cheerful fool's sword flying, leaving both in a complicated situation during the battle. Not even the audience understood what had just happened. For a moment, Happy Fool's sword turned completely red, and that person on the ground on his knees was Prince Barris. Around him, there was something similar to a barrier, like a mana shield. Everyone began to cheer at the turn the battle had taken. A mana shield is a technique only experts can use. Even his sister was thrilled by it. She was going to share the news with the protagonist, but he had disappeared. Barris seemed to have suffered some kind of damage, and the referee called for a pause, ordering Happy Fool to step away from his opponent. In addition, he had broken the rules of the match and attempted to assassinate his opponent, a gesture that could trigger a war. He was immediately warned about the possible consequences of his actions. Happy Fool's servant tried to speak with him, but the boy said nothing. Instead, he reacted violently and grabbed the extra by the neck, lifting him off the ground with all his strength until he made the extra's head explode like a bomb, dropping his lifeless body on the ground to the horror of everyone who witnessed it. Screams filled the entire arena as Prince Happy Fool had just killed someone. He looked at his hands stained with blood, seeming to enjoy the result he had achieved. The crowd didn't know what was happening inside the arena. Deeply worried, many of them began to flee, crowding around the exits. But one thing was certain, Prince Happy Fool had completely lost control. Driven by madness, he had become a monster. He needed to be stopped immediately, but they needed people capable of doing so. Our protagonist entered the arena. Today he felt it was his moment to shine. He first went to his brother, confirming that the boy was alright. But Barris was still thinking about the competition. Our protagonist tried to reassure him, saying he had performed very well. Coughing a lot, the boy hoped the prince had seen his performance, because he had formed a mana shield. The protagonist listened carefully to those words, because he still couldn't tell him the truth. That type of barrier is created by the user to protect themselves from danger, but it demands great skill. And he had placed one around his brother as a precaution, acknowledging that he was only safe thanks to his own abilities. After all, he's only 14. Seriously, what are these kids eating? A teenager in puberty with the face of a grown man. But the protagonist wouldn't let his brother keep talking in that condition. He needed to recover, so he put the boy to sleep. He was carried out of the arena by the security staff. Meanwhile, Happy Fool continued his destructive rampage. Our protagonist knew he would need to handle this situation, and walked toward him to settle it once and for all. The mages were trying to use fire magic, unleashing a massive explosion around Happy Fool. But they didn't know if their magic was even effective against that boy. After the smoke cleared, they confirmed it had been completely useless. Moreover, he was still wearing a sinister smile on his face. He had become far too powerful for those mages, and they needed to evacuate the audience immediately, because the barrier wouldn't last much longer under those conditions. Our protagonist entered the center of the arena completely unnoticed. Once he was spotted by the others, they asked what he was doing there. It was far too dangerous for someone in his condition to be in that place. They tried to make him leave. Even his sister began to worry, seeing that he was standing at the center of the arena. She couldn't understand how he had gotten there so quickly. Happy Fool appeared to be out of control, overpowering everyone who tried to stop him. His bloodlust was terrifying, and the protagonist thought it might be some kind of infection. He said the boy had changed too much in just one day, and now he would have to deal with that. But Happy Fool's power was so great it frightened even the mages present. Still, they wouldn't let him get near the prince, but their efforts were useless. They were defeated in front of the protagonist, who could have saved them but remained completely still, because he was waiting for Happy Fool to approach. But he was caught off guard by his sister's voice, who, unaware of how powerful her brother truly was since he keeps secrets, had put herself in extreme danger. Our foolish protagonist looked back, realizing the situation could get even worse, and he once again felt the threatening presence of Happy Fool. If things got worse, his sister's life could be at risk. As he hesitated to think and act, someone grabbed him by the collar. In throwing him aside, she ordered him to get out of the way. Our protagonist didn't imagine that more people thought he was too slow. Standing before his eyes was Princess Alina. Several soldiers had already been completely defeated, but the princess was different from them on a completely overwhelming level. The cheerful fool turned his attention to this woman, who already had her sword prepared to finish him off. Determined to end it quickly, she began concentrating her mana. executing a devastating blow to the cheerful fool's body. The boy seemed to feel the impact, and the wave of destruction spread across the arena. Still lying on the ground, the protagonist watched this woman. While his sister asked if he was okay, he felt like his chance had been stolen right from his hands. The princess was waiting to see the result of her strike. She kept staring firmly in the direction of her enemy, and was immediately surprised by what her eyes were seeing, because the cheerful fool remained in one solid piece, had only made him even more enraged, and he began to unleash all of his power in the middle of the arena. While he was screaming, something approached his head. It was the princess, who unleashed a barrage of attacks on the boy. If she couldn't do anything with a sword, only God knows what she planned to do with her bare hands. She managed to knock him back a bit, and was already prepared to continue the beating session, slamming the boy violently against the ground. She stepped back to see if with her hands and feet she had done what her sword could not. The other extras were impressed by that display of strength. The princess was truly very capable, and now the boy who had lost control remained on the ground, showing no reaction after that beating. The extras believed Her Highness had won the duel. Now it was just a matter of restraining the boy immediately. The protagonist's sister wanted to get out of there, knowing how dangerous it was, but the protagonist was still upset, because that woman had stolen his chance to shine. But watching her movements, he realized she had more technique than anyone else there. Part of the princess's crown began to shine intensely. She knew the boy had turned into a vampire. Our protagonist remained in place, eager to see what would happen, because the princess still hadn't stopped attacking. With the cheerful fool completely immobilized, she prepared to end his life. But the boy hadn't yet revealed his full potential. It looked like he was about to do something with his hand. The protagonist knew exactly what that meant and became tense, because the cheerful fool had stabbed himself in the chest. Even the princess was shocked by what was happening before her eyes. Even after that wound, the boy kept smiling, because he was using a secret technique of the bloodsuckers. A thick red mist began to form. It was so dense and vast that it filled the entire Colosseum. Our protagonist had to help his own sister. That mist had harmful effects on people, and the girl was already starting to lose consciousness. But our protagonist said everything would be fine and that she didn't need to worry, because that mist was nothing. The girl looked at her brother, who really seemed very calm. He asked her to rest a little now. After she wakes up from this dream, everything will have returned to normal. He waited patiently for the girl to fall asleep. Now he could focus on what really matters. He needed to work with that energy immediately. If he didn't control the necromancer's energy, it would mix with the others, and that would be a problem. The energy was screaming, saying it was fed up with this. After it connected with his own mana, that power became its own being, and he had 3 powers in total, each with his own personality. The necromancer's is basically a psychopath, very useful in battle. Normal mana is a tsundere, difficult at first, but soon proves useful and reliable. Of all of them, the most insubordinate is the sacred power. It has no interest in listening to its wielder and is the laziest of them all. If he doesn't make a fuss about the situation, he won't be able to do anything. A glow began to appear before his eyes. It seemed to have worked. He used a 4th level blessing on his sister, emitting an intense light within the mist. That was the guarantee that she would be safe, at least for a while. Now that he could better see his surroundings, it was a bit frightening. That technique is called the City of Blood. It steals the life essence of the living beings inside the mist. At the moment, the limit of the protagonist's sacred power is the 4th level. It's not enough to save everyone in the arena. Not that he feels obligated to do so, but he is happy that his brother made it out of there safely. Happy Fool's body had changed drastically, and since there were no witnesses, the protagonist decided he might as well have some fun with it. The princess hadn't been knocked down by the attack, but she was already at her limit and her sword was broken. She was surprised to see that the prince was still standing as if nothing was happening. Finally, the protagonist realized this was the worst-case scenario, because the only person left conscious there wasn't just anyone. It was Princess Elena, and she wasn't called the Sword Saint for nothing. Since our protagonist is truly addicted to love, he realized that even at death's door, that woman was stunning. So he walked over to her. He placed his hand on the girl's shoulder. Immediately, she realized what had just happened. At first, she felt something strange, and the boy asked if she could remain standing, being fully aware that the situation was still very dangerous, because Happy Fool looked more like a creature than a person. Stepping away, he only asked that she stay out of his way. But she didn't understand anything that was going on and grabbed the boy's hand, because she couldn't comprehend how he was still completely unharmed. The protagonist looked at her and said nothing. He thought she would be able to understand the situation they were in, but it really was complicated. He had been in a coma for 6 years, got out of bed just months ago, and now he was standing there so casually. Shrugging, he said he didn't know how to explain it either, completely ignoring the truth. Since he was going to be her savior, He just hoped the princess wouldn't end up hating him too much. But the girl was stubborn and told him to get out of there, because this wasn't a challenge he would be able to overcome. Our love-addicted protagonist noticed she was kind of short. The princess said he got lucky at the banquet, but the situation now was different, because this was the work of the nobles of the night, ancient demons and bloodsuckers, known as vampires. The prince remained completely unfazed. He wasn't impressed by any of it. And the princess said that someone who can't sense mana would be torn to pieces, so he better run while he still could. Our protagonist didn't believe the creature would let him leave, but the princess said she would do her best to prevent any fatalities. He watched the princess maintain her stance even though she was afraid. In fact, she might really be reliable. Unlike the previous day, her posture now seemed sincere, as if she were facing an enemy from a previous life. That's why there was so much determination in that woman. Small drops of water were falling, and the princess was walking through the castle's corridors. She saw a figure that looked like her mother, but she seemed completely transformed, leaving the little girl terrified. In her fear, she dropped her teddy bear on the ground, while listening to the drops fall, but they weren't water. Since then, she hadn't forgotten a single moment from that day, and now she found herself before a neck-biting enemy. She decided that she would wipe these creatures off the face of the earth, cutting them out at the root. That was the true purpose of her life. And the creature before her continued to gather more and more power by absorbing people's life force. The princess's determination kept growing, but the protagonist struck the girl on the neck while politely saying, "Excuse me." She didn't know what that meant. The protagonist said he didn't understand why she was so obsessed with vampires, and he didn't want to hear the story now, but it was better if she didn't interfere with his work. The girl wanted to know what he meant by that, so he told her to just sit down and watch. The hero's fist was clenched, and after gathering power, the creature began its attack. It had been a long time since our protagonist had used that technique. There was no one on Earth who knew vampires better than he did, or at least, not among the living. An infected one empowered with that technique shouldn't be any trouble. The protagonist said he would send that creature to the afterlife as many times as it wished, touching the attack with the back of his hand. That alone was enough to knock the creature off his path. He said Happy Fool still hadn't learned his lesson, and his time to learn had run out, because now it was time for the protagonist to strike with real power, landing a blow to the creature's chest, right where its heart was. It was time to return it to ashes. The magnitude of the strike was truly overwhelming, throwing the creature's body far away, destroying everything in its path. Watching everything from the best seat was the princess, who was truly impressed, because what she had just seen was simply impossible to comprehend. Our protagonist caused massive destruction. The princess, who saw it all, was now speechless, because she couldn't explain how it had happened. After releasing his anger, the prince said he finally felt relieved. With his enemy defeated, the mist was slowly dissipating, but the princess's thoughts seemed stuck in place. What had happened shouldn't be possible, because that infected creature couldn't be stopped by the knights or the mages. Not even her blade could do anything, but it was defeated by a regular human from whom she sensed no mana at all. And as if that weren't enough, this person had been in a coma just a few months ago. Our protagonist extended his hand to her, but the girl was terrified. He hadn't expected a reaction like that. Even so, he kept his hand extended toward her, and the girl began to think. Despite all of her doubts, there was still much hesitation. She was about to take the boy's hand, until she realized he wanted to borrow the sword, which left her embarrassed. She had imagined something else entirely. Trying to compose herself, she was preparing to tell him that the sword had broken during the battle. But that's not the sword he was talking about. It was the other one, the one she kept hidden. The princess didn't know how he knew about it. The protagonist said he deserved something for defeating that creature, and asked to borrow the power of the sword god. It had been forged by a god to be used in defense of humanity. In this god's hands, ordinary minerals became precious items and trash became treasure. 12 famous swords were scattered across the continent, considered national treasures. Of all his masterpieces, one received a name. This is the sword Calderas, which means White Guardian. This artifact is far beyond the others, for it was made especially for his friend Haris, the sword god. This item possesses an ego, a consciousness of its own, able to use its power however it wants. In theory, that sounds amazing. But since our protagonist knows the truth, he already knows what to expect from this personality. It's definitely not much different than what he's used to. The sword didn't like being held by him at all. His personality caused a sharp pain in his head. As expected, it's a bit rude, and he told the sword he wasn't deaf. The item was impressed that it had been heard. Our protagonist said a sword that can vibrate must be quite sassy, and asked it to cooperate with him from now on. But the princess wanted her sword back, and when she tried to grab it again, she accidentally struck the protagonist with her body. He said that if they kept acting like that, the sword's wielder was going to die. Almost out of strength, since it was the sword that was keeping her standing. She remained conscious, and the protagonist acknowledged the princess's tenacity. She was truly talented. Her opponent had been strong, and it's very important to know your own limits. The sword threatened the boy, telling him not to do anything to the princess, and he said he wouldn't. But he caused an intense glow to appear in his hand, turning that light into a new shape, and a brilliant flash shone across the arena, because the sword had been summoned, and now it was in the protagonist's hands. Patiently, he began to analyze the item. It really was a finely crafted weapon. The sword didn't understand how its power was being used, since not even its contracted owner had been able to do that. Our protagonist noted that it was a very noisy sword. All it had to do was give him its power. He'd take care of the rest. The sword expressed interest in this mysterious person and asked who the protagonist was. Before answering, he was already using the sword's full power, calling down a bolt of lightning from the heavens to strike his target, demonstrating that the sword was truly an incredible item. Our protagonist wanted to know how long his enemy planned to stay hidden, because it was time to reveal their appearance. That strike caused a small tear to appear in the air. Our protagonist had been expecting a vampire. He just hadn't expected one at such a high level. At last, the woman was revealing her silhouette. She was the weird one from the mist. The protagonist wanted to know if they had already met before. She had come because her servant had been defeated, and she didn't expect that to happen at the hands of this young man. Our protagonist says she was very strong and asked her to come down, because he had something to show her. Looking up is straining your neck, and from that angle, you can see her panties. They're dark, but very pretty. That irritated the smoke-weird girl. The protagonist already knows where this is going. Sending an attack her way, he demanded that she come to him immediately. The woman stood atop the statue. Even if the vampires are defeated, the relationship between the nations might still sour. Ignoring the woman's speech, our protagonist said that if she showed up, it's because she believes she can beat him. She might be clever, but he's trying to find the right words to say this. It's time for her to stop deluding herself. The weirdo believes he's ignoring what's really happening, and she began gathering even more energy in one of her hands, sending an attack toward the protagonist. It looked a lot like a whip. Proving to be a devastating weapon, it destroyed a large part of the arena. But all the protagonist had to do was dodge it. He recognized that the smoke-weird woman was really angry, but she hadn't stopped her attacks. Several red flashes appeared, and they started heading toward the protagonist. Those were blades extremely dangerous. Our protagonist dodged them with ease, until he noticed he was being followed by a few of them, which made it necessary for him to put real effort into evading, performing multiple acrobatics throughout the arena, until he decided to use his sword, completely destroying the approaching blades. That hadn't been much of a challenge. The smoke-weird woman said that even if he surpasses her expectations, he's still just a human. Our protagonist asks if she isn't the servant of a human despite being a vampire. The smoke-weird woman was deeply offended by that comment and went back to attacking the protagonist with her whip. Vampire lords are extremely powerful. Vampires can inherit a legacy and become lords. They can be easily defeated if facing their mortal enemies, the High Elves. Otherwise, they're formidable foes for anyone. Then the mentor asked our protagonist how he would defeat a vampire. He said he'd provoke it, and then beat it until it became obedient. The mentor said that was an interesting strategy. It would work against vampires because they are proud creatures. The stronger they are, the easier it is to provoke them. That's what he learned from the god of the sword. Apparently, they trusted the princess too much. The battle continues, and our protagonist still needs to keep dodging the attacks. Gaining a bit more distance, he managed to counterattack the creature, sending 2 powerful slashes toward her. But the smoke-weird woman managed to defend using her whip. The protagonist hadn't expected her to form a barrier. He thought it was a blood barrier, and the sword, annoyed, corrected him. It's a vampiric barrier. She's new, but considering her lineage, she might become a lord one day. The protagonist said they should deal with her now, but the sword wasn't sure that was possible. Faced with the sword's stance, the protagonist sarcastically asked if the blade thinks it's impossible, and the blade remained silent. The creature was getting more and more irritated. She said that the end of that human is obvious and inevitable. Even the girl who wielded the divine sword was defeated. If he wants a peaceful death, he should stand still and accept his fate. The smoke-weird woman destroyed everything with her attacks. But not only did our protagonist dodge them, he managed to get close to her, and now had a clear path to catch her by surprise with an attack. But the vampire believed the protagonist's efforts were in vain, and was already prepared to meet him with her whip. Only she wasn't fast enough. Our protagonist was already behind her, asking if she had just said that the techniques of the god of the sword were useless, because she's definitely ignoring something in this fight, too focused on the princess. Now she was about to witness firsthand the true technique of the god of the sword. It seemed like the vampire had been yearning for this. It didn't even feel like training. Our protagonist had repeated the same movement thousands of times, and now he held the divine sword in his hands. He said the result of this strike wouldn't be anything cute. Finally, the vampire realized the danger was real, because she was being overwhelmed by the pressure of that attack. Her barrier couldn't withstand such force, and a massive explosion occurred from the protagonist's strike. The result was simply unbelievable. Now the protagonist understands why people use good equipment. The sword was quite pleased by the compliment. She was about to say something, and he commented that the sword talks too much. She must be excited from having been materialized after several millennia, so he asked her to calm down, and the sword wanted to know how he could wield her so easily. Besides treating her as if he had known her for a long time, the protagonist doesn't want to talk about the past right now, because he knows that not even the sword would believe he is the disciple of her first owner. The sword said the vampire's presence disappeared, but she isn't dead. Still, the protagonist won't keep looking for her. He turned his attention to that stone. The sword knows this is the city of blood. She hasn't seen one in ages, and even now it makes her feel sick. Thanks to the explosion, the mist won't keep spreading, but it will remain in this place until every person is dead. With extremely high-level magic, they can purify the place in 6 months. And the protagonist knows the worst part. Humans exposed too long will become infected. The sword knows that outside, people must be hesitating. Humans are likely desperate. She said the protagonist is very lucky. Even though he's young, he's as strong as a master. And he's not being affected by the mist. He confirmed to the sword that he is the master. But he still needs time to manifest an aura blade. He's strong because he trained in a different way. He became a master due to the millennia he spent training. That's why he's so powerful. The sword started to worry about what the boy intended to do. Sensing the protagonist's mana, the sword is now certain he's a monster. She also felt both holy power and necromancer mana. She didn't know these powers could coexist. The protagonist and that destroying common sense is his life's mission. The sword finds all of this insane, while for the protagonist, it's the result of hundreds of years of research. He drove the blade into the ground, said they would stop talking. Now the sword has to finish this. He can't handle this situation with his current strength, and the sword wants to know what he means. Then our protagonist said they're going to clean up this entire mess. After hearing those words, the sword fell silent. He doesn't want to sacrifice himself to save strangers, but if it helps with his recovery, he'll take the opportunity. Because it's a way to use the powers he already possesses, powers that are now dormant. And even if it's not really his style, he has no other choice. Sitting down, he began to pray, directed to Freya. He asked her to send light because he knows the goddess can help him. Seeing this, the sword began to sweat in fear, because she doesn't recognize that prayer. The protagonist's divine power is a bit disobedient due to the one who taught it to him. Out of patience, he knows the goddess is watching everything, so he asked her to give permission for this. The sword doesn't believe this prayer will be answered by the gods. Our protagonist looked at the sword and said she knows nothing about the gods. Those followers who receive divine love aren't the ones who speak. It's those who awaken the gods' curiosity. And now the protagonist is going to show that it's possible to save those people's lives, using the enchantment of the greatest user of divine power, Daphne, the enchantment that can only be used with God's permission. Gods he knows and thinks are all insane, especially those who are already mad. The sword realized something was happening. That sacred magic is 9th level. Its name is Divine Sanctuary, and an intense light burst forth. The sword thought our protagonist wanted to kill her, completely draining her reserves. But the boy assured her she wouldn't die. Even so, the sword remained extremely worried. But the glow of the magic was so strong that the stone began to crack. The protagonist had to remain determined and focused, because he needed to complete the entire task. The glow was already so intense that it filled the entire Colosseum. Outside, people also couldn't say what was happening, because the entire city was lit up by that glow, which slowly faded, returning to the sky. From that magic, small feathers could be seen. And now the protagonist has wings of energy. With that, there was nothing left to be done, because that stone was destroyed. That shockwave was very powerful, making the protagonist's back ache a bit. He asked if the sword was still alive, but she refused to respond. Apparently, the power was stronger than she could manage, and now she's unconscious. But the protagonist isn't much better. Falling to the ground, he said he's about to lose consciousness. That's when his eyes saw something. He sees a status window with information about himself. He told Lady Freya that this is already a bit too much, but the goddess stated that this is still nothing. It's been a long time since he last rested without any worries. At least he hasn't been able to in the past 6 months. He feels like his mind is being cleansed. Then the image of that wonderful princess appeared. Right after that, he woke up to his sister's voice. That night, which seemed to be the same day, someone asked if the protagonist was feeling okay. He doesn't know how long he was asleep. He found out from his sister that he had been out for 2 whole days. She was desperate, thinking he might not wake up again. The protagonist didn't like that he made her worry for no reason, but now there's nothing he can do about it. She told him she had a dream. In that dream, he had already saved everyone when the red mist reached them all. He gently patted his sister's head, smiling without saying that the dream had actually been real. Then the girl asked him to be honest. Was it him who ended the red mist? Because she found something while examining her brother's body. A strange marking appeared on his back, almost like a stigma, and it's quite large. The protagonist thought that the pain he felt in his back might have been caused by the appearance of the stigma. That never happened while he was in the temple, and he found the marking far too large. The priest who treated his wounds was the one who found it, and because of that, the duchy is in an uproar. The protagonist's body was discovered next to the sacred sword surrounded by divine energy. The stigma is a sign that he was chosen by the gods so people didn't panic. His sister just wants to know the truth, and the protagonist realized that people still don't know what really happened. He himself doesn't know what to do now, as he doesn't have the right answer about whether he should reveal his powers or not, because he doesn't know what could happen after that. He fears it might cause more trouble than good and said he doesn't remember much. To reassure his sister, he told her that his body is no longer injured. His body is in such good condition now that it's almost a problem. Because he used that much divine energy, his sacred power increased significantly, and his mana reserve has become terrifyingly large. All of his mana reserves grew, and now he can manifest a unique aura blade. Additionally, the divine power that barely grew before is what increased the most from this battle. Now he needs more opportunities to keep growing. His sister tried to say that things are a mess, especially for his personal servant. He remembers Amy from before he lost consciousness. His sister also said that Princess Helena had been looking for him and wanted to take him to a proper doctor. Our protagonist said the girl must be tired of taking care of him and that he would like to reflect on some things alone. Before leaving, she told him not to worry about Barais as it had been safe all this time, and she wished her brother a peaceful rest. Now he has a better sense of how things are. He waited for his sister to walk away down the corridors and opened that peculiar window again. This really feels like a game, but he doesn't know why it only appeared now. Maybe it was because of his prayer or because he used magic that should have only been used in his astral body. All of this feels very complicated, but a mysterious voice said he seems to enjoy being able to read the minds of others. After the shock, the protagonist went silent. He doesn't know where that mysterious voice came from. He wants to know who this is, someone who hid their presence to approach him. He would find out. Hearing something from behind, the voice said it was there, until it revealed itself before him. She was shocked, as her seal had been broken unintentionally. But if it was divine will, she would accept it. Our protagonist then remembered his days of training. His mentor was painting something. The boy asked who that person was, and the mentor asked back who he thought it looked like. Looking at all the features, he thought it might be some kind of demon. But due to the beauty, she must be of some elevated species. It didn't take long for that to be confirmed, and the boy wanted to know why his mentor was painting her portrait. Besides finding her beautiful, he said she's different from all the other girls. And he had painted her portrait so many times that it's engraved in his mind. Her name is Berserk. When she still looked human, he adopted her and taught her how to wield a sword. And as the legends say, to end the Great War, he had to seal the demon lord within his sword. The lord's name was Berserk von Fallen. The boy had heard that name once before in his life, and she was surprised that a human knew her. Apparently, his eyes do not deceive him. The only problem is that she is very small. The girl warned that she doesn't like being tied up, and that our protagonist must be quite the rascal. But he said they don't know each other well enough yet to be making jokes. Though, this isn't their first time talking, so there was no need to be hostile. Our protagonist wants to know what's going on, and the Demon King said they are bound to each other. She spoke about the stigma on his back, for it is to him that her soul is now bound. That's why the size of that thing is not normal. Imagining that this stigma is the seal of a Demon King, our protagonist can't find that funny. He said none of this makes any sense. The Demon King asked if he could untie her, since she's not the type to enjoy these things, especially not in such a vulgar position, because it's just a bit too embarrassing. Our protagonist freed the Demon King and asked why she's not inside the sword. He wanted to hear a plausible explanation, and once again she said they are bound, and then formally introduced herself to him. She is Berserk, daughter of darkness, the Demon King of the Abyss. In very old tales, she was the cause of the war between humans and demons. The divine sword Calderas was used to end that war, at least that's what everyone hears, but the soul of the Demon King was sealed in the sword. Our protagonist is trying to understand if that figure is really the Demon King, because she doesn't look like the legends say, and she noticed that our protagonist already seemed to know about her. She said that Calderas wouldn't be so cruel as to imprison the soul of a friend. If she had known this was going to happen, she wouldn't have said goodbye too. So she decided to explain things clearly to him. She was transferred to him through the stigma because of the will of the gods. Our protagonist hopes she has a better explanation than that, but if she did, she wouldn't be so frustrated. All of this happened because of the holy powers he possesses, and he should be responsible for it. The Demon King said she's interested in him because he's the second person ever to use the divine sword to its full potential. The protagonist said he only used Hara's techniques. The Demon King noticed that he speaks of this person as if he had met him, and the protagonist confirmed it's true, saying that Hara spoke of her whenever he had the chance. The girl was moved that he still remembers her. It's good to know he didn't hide that fact, but the protagonist asked her to keep it a secret, even if it makes no sense to lie to a Demon King who can see through people. She corrected one thing about that. The Demon King can't see through people, she just borrows the will of higher beings. Our protagonist asked if she's talking about the status window. To the Demon King, humans used to call that God. The boy didn't expect that those higher beings would give such a raw description of him. He wasn't expecting anything from the God who gave him divine powers. The Demon King said it's nice to meet someone different, and she hopes to explore the world with him. After living for so long, that's the only interest she has left. Our protagonist asked what he's going to gain from it, and the demon said he already gained her abilities. Just like in the games he used to play, he received skills. The boy didn't imagine she knew about his past life. To her, this is a very good deal, and she's very excited to see where he will take them. Thinking better about it, our protagonist agrees her abilities are very appealing, but it seems like he has no choice either, and he decided that from that point on, they would get along. Now he has someone he can share all his secrets with. A few days passed and the kingdom is still in turmoil over what happened, and because of the appearance of a stigma. At the center of it all is the protagonist looking outside. Berserk said people are gathering. Popularity is very exhausting, and she suggested that the protagonist tell the truth, but he's not interested. And most of the people are priests who want to see the stigma. But since this is a sign of divine love, the Demon King understands them. It's as rare as the birth of a saint, and they appear from time to time, once every century. The protagonist made his decision and told his siblings to pack their things immediately. He doesn't have time to explain all the details, but his siblings know he's worried about the overwhelming number of visitors. The little one doesn't understand why they keep going there non-stop. It's not like that place is sacred ground, but the protagonist knows it is sacred because of what happened there. In fact, half of that entire city is sacred, but right now they need to flee, and flee quickly. They were finally ready to continue their journey. The demon asked if it's really okay to leave like this, certain they'll be pursued, but the protagonist doesn't care about that. The next day, the princess learned that he had fled. It made her furious. Even after everything that happened, he left without giving any explanation. And she knows the version of events being told isn't the truth. The princess wants to know what really happened. And now that she knows he fled, she is completely out of control with rage. Her most loyal servants can't believe what they're seeing. The princess, once cold and indifferent to everything, is now acting passionately. She ordered the soldiers to prepare to march immediately. The carriage moves toward the protagonist's kingdom. His siblings are sleeping peacefully. Seeing the two like this, it almost looks like they get along. The demon asked if it's not a waste. She's referring to Calderas. She noticed the protagonist is interested in it and he can wield the sword, unlike its current bearer. He is the perfect candidate to hold that sword, but he knows it feeds on greed, and he won't be able to use such strong magic again anytime soon, since he needs to recover his power. The demon believes he can do it again. He just needs to take the sword back, but the protagonist doesn't want to take something from a child. He also believes the sword isn't right for him, preferring larger blades. And one day he'll find the weapon he truly wants, because he already knows exactly what he's going to use. The demon notices he's thinking about something, and the protagonist didn't realize she was reading him. But she made it clear she doesn't know everything just because she's the Demon King. When she inspects his thoughts, there are parts she can't access. One example is trivial things. Berserker said his enemies won't be able to relax after the appearance of the stigma. He should take advantage of this opportunity. But our protagonist wants to prepare since the queen has great influence across the entire territory. It will take time to bring down her power, and that's why she remains so arrogant. However, our protagonist seems to have reached a conclusion. The king said his son did very well, but the young man doesn't feel that way. He said his son's job was to return safely, as the failure lies with the kingdom of Boltis. Later, when speaking with the protagonist, he asked about the stigma, and the boy confirmed he had received divine interest. He asked what the queen thought of it as well, and even full of hatred. She had to keep up appearances and agree it was a good thing. The protagonist asked if she truly believed that, and with a bit of hesitation, she reaffirmed her stance. but inside she wanted to destroy the protagonist, who enjoyed watching her forced performance. The king asked the duke to file a formal complaint with the alliance because of what happened. Knowing everyone was tired from the journey, he asked them to rest, but he requested his eldest son stay for a moment, and our protagonist obeyed. The two went to have tea and talk. It was the first time they had spoken since the boy woke up from his coma. The king asked if he harbored any resentment, and the protagonist said he had no reason to lie, and that such things didn't need to be externalized. He also said they were always watching his house. The king didn't imagine the boy knew that. It seems the king believes he was always in the right. Parents know when their children change, and he realized Davy had changed after waking up. Even knowing he's a mediocre father, he was surprised the boy even wanted to meet with him. There's something the boy wants to ask the king. You remember when he begged the king for help because his mother was sick? The boy was desperate, and the king ordered his servants to take the child away from that place. And the boy was left completely isolated. All he wanted was for his father help in some way. At 9 years old, the boy found out his mother had been murdered, and even then the king kept avoiding the subject, using her illness as an excuse. He wants to know why he threw away the woman he once loved. He assumes he did all of this for the stability of the kingdom, marrying into the enemy family. The boy is not interested in hearing about his father's love life, who is addicted to love, just like the son. He only wants to know if the king truly felt nothing, since his mother never stopped talking about the husband she had, and she died apologizing. But boy wants to know what his father felt, and he was told to become king. He was not a good king nor a good father, and a king must make choices. The boy should be more resilient and grow stronger, so that no one could stop him. That's the answer he has for his own story. He realized that the king hadn't forgotten his first wife. Our protagonist said children resemble their parents, but that's not his case because he would never abandon his family for the good of the kingdom. Our protagonist slammed the table in anger, asking what it means to be a king, and if his place is so desired, he should give it to someone else, because he wouldn't take it even if it were given as a gift. After that conversation, he returned to his chambers. The Demon King felt the boy had been harsh, but it had been necessary. It doesn't matter what she thinks, he won't change his position, because it's not like she can see through everything. At least now he has an answer. Saying he would go to sleep, he asked Amy not to let anyone in. The boy immediately went to the window, asking if he should enter the rabbit hole. At the headquarters of the Black Moon Guild, word had spread that Sherry had gone missing. The assassins under her command had disappeared some time ago, and now she vanished without a trace. The regional leader knows this happened to her subordinates after they attempted to assassinate the prince and his siblings. A woman in the room said there was no need to have sent an A-rank informant. They already didn't have much information about her identity, which makes her disappearance suspicious. Besides, the targets she once had are still alive, and it wouldn't be bad to see what a real assassin is capable of. And that mysterious man, who looked quite a lot like a woman, said he would bring the bodies of her victims along with the head of the possible traitor. But that man's overconfidence will end up being his downfall. Sherry was an A-rank assassin whose skills were exceptional. Most assassins worth anything could tell this woman was extremely dangerous. To think that, on top of failing, she disappeared is truly a desperate situation for him. The regional leader thought he'd tie up a few loose ends and get out of that city immediately. He started pressing a button, but no one came after that, which made him even more worried. It was like a panic button, and if no one came, it meant things were already bad. He stood up from his chair, a bit panicked. Someone told him not to move. His subordinate who had been in that room was already taken out, and now the regional leader was pinned to the desk. The person who did it was surprised he was human and not a vampire. The man screamed in despair, saying there was an intruder there. He tried to call for help, but no one in the building was in a condition to do so. Realizing that, the man kept his desperation silent, because the person who did this was clearly stronger than him, and at this rate, he'd end up just like the others. He started thinking it could be the work of another guild, but not even they could pull this off so easily. Maybe that person had been sent by his own superiors, and the mysterious man asked if the regional leader wanted to live, because he would allow it if a man was willing to share some information. The leader said he could get information if a formal procedure had been initiated, but the mysterious man wanted information that couldn't be bought. In response, his hostage said he would tell him what he wanted to know, so his captor released his hands, told him he didn't need much. He wanted a list of every aristocrat loyal to House Varietta and proof of their acts of corruption, because there are signs that this duchy is trying to rally other nobles to its cause, and there must be documents about that. The man tried to resist, but was quickly reminded of his situation, and realized he would be finished if he didn't cooperate. That mysterious man is truly dangerous, a master among assassins, and he asked the victim if she needed another warning. Because detecting lies is his specialty, it's best not to try bluffing. But it's up to him what he wants to do with his life. The man knows why a master assassin is in such a small kingdom. He gathered several scrolls and gave them to the master assassin. Our protagonist knew this wouldn't be easy. There are many false names and unnecessary information there. He needs to keep searching. That's why he called it the rabbit hole. He told the Demon King they need to gather more information to clean out that aristocracy. She realized this will lead to a bloodbath. But our protagonist said he won't kill them all. He needs to play by the rules of the game. Even if they are aristocrats, none of them are above the law. He wants to speak with one of the 3 sword masters of the kingdom, Peltrais, who was his mother's personal knight when she was alive. The knight received a document that deeply worried him. He went to the butler to find out who had delivered the letter. The protagonist's cleansing operation was already underway. He was watching everything happening in that place. The Demon King wanted to ask him a question. She was observing our protagonist with great interest. What does he truly want? But the protagonist said she already knows the answer, though she still wants to hear it from his own mouth. The goal is far too obvious. He wants to fix his family and have nothing to worry about in that place, to live a long and peaceful life. She started laughing because noble life is full of obstacles, and according to her, he already lives a peaceful life. He asked if he really looks like that, and she admitted he still has a lot of work to do. The kingdom needs to be strengthened. The royal family only has a small territory, and our protagonist wants to live there and enjoy a peaceful life. He'll use knowledge from his past life in that place, but the demon thinks the plan is too vague. She wants to know if he doesn't want revenge. Our protagonist explained that it's part of the process, but not his main goal, because after revenge, life still goes on. After hearing that, she suggested he inherit the throne and change the country, but a king can't live a peaceful life. Our protagonist has already reached a conclusion. He doesn't need to live in that place, but he will make sure to build something worth coming back to one day. They are telling the queen that the mark on the prince's body should be a source of pride for the whole nation, and she agrees with those words. She suggested he be given an award, a kind of reward. He had already received a piece of land before, and she suggested he be sent there so he could contribute even more to the kingdom. Some nobles thought it was very strange that she praised the first prince. All of that is nothing more than a grand performance, and she hates having to bow to it. The assassination plan failed, and her best tool has disappeared. He had returned without the stigma. She could have finished him off. Now, everything is more difficult. She must stay focused. She found out that last night, several pieces of information were leaked. Every information guild in the kingdom was destroyed in a single night. She was informed that the one responsible was a master assassin, whose aura was terrifying. Going after him is dangerous, and there's no one in this kingdom capable of doing it. But the queen insists because losing information is far too risky. She will be in danger if that information falls into the hands of that knight. It could even spark a revolution in this kingdom. She suspects the same person is involved in everything. Even though she has no proof, she believes the one who caused all this and the one protecting the prince are the same. Still, she believes there's hope. She just needs to get rid of that bastard. There's only one option left, legally exile Danilo. And that's where the bitter queen will place her focus now. She suggested he be sent to other lands, thinking he would refuse, but she was surprised by the result. The king found it interesting, to the queen's total shock. It's not appropriate for an adult prince who won't inherit the crown to remain in the palace, and this should be dealt with urgently. And the king seemed interested in that idea as well. He ordered the prince to be brought to the hall. The queen doesn't know what he's planning. Our protagonist had already been expecting this. The king realized his son is a ticking time bomb, so he wants to get him out of the palace as soon as possible. He should go and cultivate the land he received, so that his existence may shine in some way. The protagonist will follow these orders. The Demon King noticed the king is afraid of what his son might do. Even if things hadn't reached that point, he would have done it anyway. Because what he had to do in that place was already fulfilled, he didn't need to stay in the palace. Everything is happening according to the protagonist's plans. He said he would leave as soon as he was ready. The Demon King noticed that the king's heart is not at peace, since many lives could be lost in this process. But our protagonist doesn't care. The country needs to go through a reform before the next king ascends the throne. He doesn't want Barris to have to deal with that mess, and this is an interesting opportunity to deal with his enemies. After the announcement, he went outside. His brothers are already looking for him. They want to know why he's leaving and what this is all about. They want to speak with the king to get him to change his mind, but our protagonist just wants to leave. He asked his brothers to trust the decisions he's making. Even so, they're full of concern because he's going to the Heinz territory. If he were in trouble, he should talk to them. They would go help him. Even if it's a wasteland, it's still a place where people live. He would make the place prosperous and is already looking forward to having his brothers visit it. Back at his palace, he called for Amy. He asked her to gather all documents related to the land they're going to. She asked if there was any specific document, but our protagonist wants access to everything. Just say that the prince himself sent her there. He needs to know his enemies. If they do that and know themselves, they will be unbeatable. That's what he told the Demon King, words from his past life. She really liked that. Situations like this spark her interest. Despite having great strength and skill, our protagonist hasn't become arrogant. She finds that very interesting, and he found her opinion a bit odd. The Demon Lord said her life was very boring, unlike our protagonists. He never imagined someone would enjoy living his life indirectly, but she said our protagonist should be proud because she's becoming his fan. And truly, she seems excited. An attention our protagonist didn't want to have. Amy managed to return with the documents faster than expected. But the prince saw it was less than he imagined, though those are all the documents concerning that territory. He thought maybe that's for the best, less bureaucracy will make his job easier. The boy began to analyze the documents. Even the demon lady was helping with the task. They realized that land is cursed. The Lord doesn't know how he managed to end up with such a terrible plot of land. Despite everything, our protagonist is very grateful. They're already organizing materials to depart on the journey. Apparently, Amy will be the protagonist's only companion. It will be a modest farewell, but our protagonist can't change that. He has no knights loyal to him. It's as if he were a poor wanderer, but someone came to see him. The knight who once served his mother came there. He heard that the prince was leaving. He said the boy could become the kingdom's successor. The boy said he's not so sure about that, and the knight looked at him firmly. He said the young man had matured a lot. If the queen were alive to see him, she'd be proud. Our protagonist said he'd only be a disappointment to his mother. If that's the case, then the knight who protected her should return to his land. Our protagonist said that's not true. He had learned a few things about that man when he infiltrated his house. He never stopped investigating the queen's death. He said the protagonist could talk to him if he ever needed anything because he helped with everything he had. The prince said that if the knight helped him, it could cause problems in the kingdom. Smiling, the knight said that if it didn't cause problems, then his oath would mean nothing. Our protagonist said he would turn that land into a livable place and entrusted the knight with taking care of the capital. He hopes the knight can cleanse the corrupt aristocracy so that the protagonist can strike the final blow. He's already arriving in his new territory. Turns out it's closer to the capital than he thought. The Demon Lord rested through the entire trip. The two are already working very well together, and you realize that she needs to sleep a lot because her ability to materialize is still weak. He said it's not cheap to sleep on his legs, but the Demon Lord doesn't care about that. Covering her with a cloth, our protagonist said she's truly living life. The coachman announced that they are arriving at their destination. Their caravan has entered Hein's territory. It lies in the eastern part of the kingdom, near an ancient mine bordering a monster-inhabited region. The good side is that it's close to the route leading to the capital and the land is vast. If the roads are maintained, it could become a trade route. But at the moment, the place looks completely devastated. That land was once fertile, but now it's exhausted. The reason for this is still unknown. He saw through the system that there really is an evil power causing it. But he also learned from it that recovery is a possibility. The Demon Lord was certain it was a curse she had already awakened. There is a type of curse that spreads endlessly. Our protagonist didn't expect to find traces of dark magic in that place. It must have been the work of a former resident. The territory ended up unlucky, and our protagonist began the purification process. But it seems it won't be an easy task. Curses that have lasted this long are troublesome. Getting off the carriage, he began to wonder if the whole region is truly like this. There are barely any mages using dark magic nowadays. Much has changed in this world. The prince's caravan was stopped as they were entering the city. They were being asked to present their identification. There were some guards stationed outside the city. Even so, our protagonist realized that the security is very poor. But you should at least be thankful that there is any kind of security there, because the city could easily be invaded by monsters. Living there would be impossible without the guards. The guards wanted to call the captain, but the prince said it wasn't necessary. He hasn't yet received the title of lord of that region. He asked everyone to relax as they'll be seeing a lot of each other from now on. The townspeople received him as royalty. One of the guards apologized for not greeting him earlier. Our protagonist noticed that the man's hands were trembling and wounded. He began analyzing the whole place more closely. He asked how long ago the messengers had arrived in the city. The man said it's been 2 days, and even so, he still seemed very uneasy. He asked to be punished, but the prince wanted to know when the monster attacks began. The guard didn't understand the prince's motive. He didn't know how the prince had access to that information. Our protagonist said he would purge the curse, starting with eliminating the goblins. That man is the head of the Watchmen. He's ashamed because he is also responsible for the region. His name is Monmeter, but now he's simply called Mustache. The protagonist could see he was filled with worries about the land, about the people, and said that managing that region must be very difficult. He asked him to keep up the good work, and he would do just that. Our protagonist also said that the fruits of his efforts could already be seen and promoted the watchmen to official guards, and he hoped Mustache would be the one to train them. He said the man has the skills needed for it, and therefore he is now officially hired. He added that as they improve, they will receive titles since the prince has the authority to grant them. These are his ideals. On the way there, he came across tracks of the creatures. The goblins had infiltrated the castle. He wanted to know how that happened. With constant attacks, the guards were already fatigued and wounded. Dozens of homes had been burned and many of the town's residents kidnapped. Our protagonist asked what the internal situation of the city was and learned that they had enough food to last until winter, but they had a very bad year. Using the resources he had received, the prince wouldn't last 2 years, observed the demon lord. He suggested that she become his personal assistant, but she refused the offer, saying she liked to sleep too much. It seems he has no other choice. And then he showed a few platinum coins. He ordered his new guard to buy food and repair materials. That should help for the time being. Amy said that amount of money was enormous. But our protagonist asked her not to worry as the money was obtained honestly, though they don't know he got it by robbing thieves. The demon lord said that even so, the money was still dirty. The head butler would accompany this task. They would take 4 days to complete it, and the prince is counting on them. Now it's time to begin the cleansing. He ordered all troops to gather, leaving only a minimum number behind to protect the place. Rescue operations need to be swift to increase their effectiveness. He thanked everyone for gathering, introduced himself, and said he would become the lord of that region. People already know some citizens have been kidnapped, and they must be scared and outraged. Seeing those people, he realized not everyone has potential like Bigode. Our protagonist made it clear she has no intention of remaining defenseless in these lands. One of the people said that bringing guards into the land of monsters is a death sentence. The prince asked if he already wished to surrender, but the man said he knew the prince came from the capital and things are different in that region. If they fail the attack, there will be retaliation from the monsters, and the prince assured them they will not fail. Even while preparing for the battle, he could see what people thought of him. They think he's just another self-centered noble, and it's hard not to agree with them. He told the people that he is not a prince, but the lord of that region, and whether they like it or not, they are his subjects and his family, and he would not let his family die. If they don't trust him, they should trust the stigma on his body left by the gods. But if that's not enough, they should see him as an oppressive ruler and follow him out of fear. He values life and will not let any of them die without his permission. Even so, the citizens remained doubtful. At night, someone said his speech wasn't bad. The group of soldiers he had gathered is tired and experienced. The prince needs to establish his strategy, and the demon lord noted that he's living life a bit too peacefully. All he needs are those 150 soldiers, because any goblins that outnumber them will be executed by the prince himself. One of the men said they had arrived at their destination. The goblins could already be seen on the other side. It looked like an abandoned city, and the protagonist thought goblins and orcs were enemies. According to patrols, the creatures were gathering in that place. They had captured one of the men's daughters. The prince asked if the man felt anger, and whether they wanted to eliminate those creatures, or fight for their fallen companions. All of them wanted revenge. He realized they were all enraged, seeking vengeance for people who weren't even their relatives. Our protagonist really liked the region he had acquired, and he fired an arrow toward the creatures. One of them was distracted. It didn't even notice when its companion was struck down by the arrow. When the body hit the ground, the creatures panicked. The soldiers can't fight the creatures head-on, but he reminded his men. They must not forget, he won't let any of them die. Still, everyone was already terrified. The creatures knew they were under attack, and our protagonist had trained with Apollo himself, the master of the bow, hence his great skill. He had no intention of using guerrilla tactics against these creatures. He won't hesitate to pick up the broom and sweep the city clean of dust. He began to radiate his holy power before those men, and gave his first command to them at that moment. He raised his hand high, using a technique that increased all of their attributes. They wouldn't even be able to describe what kind of magic that was, but every one of them without exception had been strengthened. The protagonist believes he's just doing a bit of charity, but he had used a powerful enhancement enchantment. In the whole world, few people are capable of doing something like that. Even paladins from the sacred lands would struggle to do it. It would require a priest of very high level. Our protagonist gave his men permission to unleash all their resentment, and he had always wanted to try something in particular, which made the demon lord curious. He gave a slight smile, told his men that they had become stronger, and they should attack. The demon lord didn't understand a thing. Those men were already set on avenging themselves against the creatures, and they immediately began executing them. That explains the expression on each of their faces. They looked like they were in complete ecstasy. They weren't afraid of the danger. On the contrary, they were overwhelming the creatures with ease. Even they couldn't believe how easy it was. It wasn't a battle, it was a complete massacre. One of the soldiers got injured. Our protagonist went to him to heal the wound. The soldiers were surprised, and our protagonist reminded them that holy power is not omnipotent. He would not allow any of them to die, so they should prepare quickly. Everyone who gets injured will be held accountable once they return to the city, and the soldiers don't want to disappoint their new lord. Watching the performance of his new army, he started to wonder if this is what Berserker Fury looks like. He almost felt sorry for the goblins who were being annihilated. They finally managed to win that battle. The prince went to inspect the area to make sure it was truly over, only to hear his men praising him. He's really enjoying that. But he warned that it's not yet time to celebrate, because they still need to rescue those who were kidnapped. His desire was to indoctrinate his men with a little fear and admiration. But unfortunately, all of them are already irreversibly impressed with the prince. Even so, things are unfolding according to plan. In the battle of following day, they remain very enthusiastic, and another victory is achieved. The soldiers in the city hope that this new lord is a decent person, since he left with only a few men. One of them said he's just a 16-year-old child and must be blinded by the taste of his first victory, until someone asked what they were doing there, since they should be moving the barrier soon. The lord returned to the city. Those two guards don't understand what's going on, and they were very surprised. He really defeated the creatures with 10 guards and 3 knights. The prince wasn't expecting to receive such a reception. The expression on the people's faces is one of great surprise. The demon lord said what he did is as astonishing as giving drugs to these people. At this rate, they might end up creating a religion around him. The prince warned that there must still be some creature settlements left, so they would head out on regular cleanup missions, leaving behind the necessary forces to protect the city. He then dismissed his men. Noticing that they're all very impressed, he hopes that feeling will fade after a few days. Rumors travel faster than the wind itself, and many of the city's residents are already treating the lord kindly. Some even get into fights over it. That possible idolization made the prince start to regret some of his decisions. He succeeded in earning the trust of all the residents. Perhaps a noble in that land was useless. At least that's what the residents used to think. But he learned from the conqueror Estrella that no matter how small the land is, he rules over people, not cattle. People must follow him of their own free will. The protagonist didn't learn politics from him, but he did absorb some good advice. The demon lord wants to know the state of the land as she has obtained more information. Our protagonist also wants to know what she thinks about all of it. If he can lift the curse, that place will return to normal in 5 years, and in 20 it will become what he dreams of. And that's not based only on the protagonist's strength. She has more opinions to share about that land. Our protagonist wants to hear everything she thinks. That region has no water supply system, and the poor harvest led to a small food stockpile, along with job losses. The money he invested isn't enough. The biggest problem there is the lack of resources, and that region has never been profitable. But if the problem is money, our protagonist has a solution, which made the demon lord curious. He was surprised by her reaction. That land has many capable use, since their first means of survival is hunting monsters and animals. The second would be planting crops in that region, but they need to resolve the curse first. The last method is through commerce, but there is no commercial incentive for that region, and the protagonist said they don't need to trade with humans. So they should inspect the region first, because they need to use everything within their reach. Looking at that land, he always wanted to have a building, and now the protagonist owns a large piece of land which used to be a farm. They were confiscated from the former owner, and now belong to the protagonist. Hidden in that land lies the root of the curse, and in his current condition, he won't be able to restore that land with magic. He could possibly do it if he had Calderas and even considered borrowing the sword from the princess. She seems very proud and thought of using the excuse of taking a look to borrow the sword, but the demon lord advises against it. The only solution left for them is to do it on their own. Our protagonist said they've been complaining a lot lately, and the demon lord wants to know who he's referring to. He said she'll find out soon enough because there's a child who wants to show off. Told her to go ahead while she still has the chance, conjuring a large magic circle on the ground. The demon lord has never seen a formation like that in her life, which makes sense, since the creator of that magic is from another continent. That magic uses a very specific language. Dark mages need several artifacts as well as a great deal of time to be able to cast a curse that will help the protagonist find the root of the curse. He is waiting patiently, and it seems he has found the flaw in the place and has begun to fix it. That demanded a lot from him, and turning away from the demon, he asked for her help. He wanted to know if this really resembled a curse, because it didn't seem like one. According to that magic, a place was appearing like a heated room. After that, they went to the borders of the region. In that place, they reach other conclusions as they are still searching for the source of the curse. The demon lord remains quite curious. She wants to know if the lack of rain and the barren soil are part of the curse. The protagonist said that in some way they are, but his magic identified that the curse has only one effect. It maintains a specific condition, and if it persists in a region for a long period, it can become complicated. He doesn't know what purpose it was created for, but it destroyed that place. Looking ahead at the problem, our protagonist began to wonder what would happen if he could modify this new condition. He might be able to turn that place into a tourist region. He finally found very ancient ruins. He didn't imagine something like that could exist in such an arid place. It was certainly built before the Great War. Maybe not even the dark mages were aware of that region. It's very quiet there. He expected to find some kind of tavern. As soon as he finished speaking, a large stone creature appeared. There was a magical stone on the creature's face. The demon lord said it must be a magical creature, since it's using a mana stone. She asked the protagonist to be cautious as the creature might have strange abilities, but he can sense a special smell, and one of the creatures tries to strike. That served as confirmation for our protagonist. He was already on top of one of the creature's heads, and he placed his hands on the mana stone. The smell was getting stronger and stronger, the smell of the money he was about to make. In the city, the guards are enjoying this time of peace. The Lord went out to patrol his lands. The guards don't even worry about him because they know he'll return safely, as he showed them a miracle not long ago. None of those people expected the noble to be so kind, because the more power nobles gained in that kingdom, the more corrupt they had become. The only benefit the region received from the kingdom was a tax reduction, and even that took a long time to happen. And for no apparent reason, they sent that boy to become lord of those lands. People thought he had lost a political dispute and was given that place as punishment. Even so, there was nothing they could do about the situation, and they were still being attacked by monsters, able to enter the city and kidnap some people. Given the situation, a rescue mission was completely impossible. As if things couldn't get worse, the noble from the capital arrived in the city. Even though he seemed friendly, they didn't know what to expect from that boy. They thought he would punish the captain of the guard, and if he did, there were among the townspeople those who would certainly rise up. And they were just watching the situation unfold. But the prince took it upon himself to face the problems of that region, and he even found a way to fight against the goblins. He called an all-family, rescuing those who had been kidnapped. The prince's words and actions changed the lives of everyone, although he made it very clear they should not see him as a saint. In just a few days, he became more important to the townspeople than God himself. The truth is, a man who performs miracles is more important than a god who only watches. One man comments that it's very good the monster problem has been resolved, but he doesn't know if there's hope for that land. Because of the long years of drought, they don't know if the land can ever be productive again. Even the lands around the castle, which used to receive rain, started being affected. Several people went there to investigate the causes, but none of them could solve the problem. The townsfolk believe this isn't a solution that can come from human hands, and they believe the rains will never reach that place. It's only a matter of time before it completely dries up. Spirit stones, that's the name of this mineral that holds so much mana. Compared to regular mana stones, they are hundreds of times more powerful. Our protagonist seems very interested in them. After defeating all the creatures, he needed to catch his breath. He found the battle intense, but the demon lord disagrees. He's very eager to find out how much they're worth. Few have ever been found on the continent, and he got 20 of them at once. The demon said he should be cautious when selling them, or he might attract attention he doesn't want. In those ruins, there was a genuinely enormous spirit stone, and that is the heart of the entire curse. It would be a shame if the truth about that stone were revealed, as it could lead to wars between nations. The purity of that ore is truly special. If one were to use the magic of that stone, they could cast 9th level enchantments. The protagonist begins to feel that power. The language he's observing there doesn't resemble what he saw outside. It's possible there's still something in that place he doesn't yet know about, because he's still figuring out how this system works. To make changes, you first need to understand that algorithm, and he ended up getting curious about a small part of the code. After making a small alteration, those numbers changed color. The center began to transform, until a major change was executed. The light that was once blue turned green. The protagonist's intervention had worked. Seeing all of that, the demon lord wants to know what he had done. That land had lived in drought for many years, so he thought it would be good to give them some rain. But there's a catch. Inside the city, the guards are working on rebuilding the wall. They noticed that rain began falling from the sky. A completely unexpected scene for all of them, that the rain was falling on the city, watering the soil that had long been dry. The situation is far from easy. This is the worst-case scenario. Nobles are worried about what might happen to them and want to erase all evidence. Lower-ranking nobles were already purged at the first opportunity. They want to know what the resentful queen is doing about this, but they don't understand her either, and it seems the first prince has manifested a stigma. The mark appeared on his back, and they say it's unstable. In this state, the Holy Kingdom is in the same mud as they are, and they certainly won't accept the prince. The queen should ignore the hair and pay attention to those who truly pose a threat, the king and the knight Beatrice. But the noble merely shared his opinion. The mysterious man began listing the circumstances, saying that the noble's cohesion wouldn't fall apart overnight. They need to fight their enemies, even if it means blood will be spilled. And he wants to know if the other nobles agree with that. Even if they do, they're very apprehensive. But they want to recover that confidential information at any cost, or internal conflict will be inevitable. He looked at a marquis who was present, and the man said he would make the preparations as soon as he received the order. He should act discreetly as they cannot commit themselves until everything is ready. Everyone there is underestimating the prince's capabilities. That noble also can't intervene directly, but all of his instincts are pointing to the source of the problem, and that there's something about the prince they still don't know. He's sure it might not be the case now, but once this prince gains political power, he won't hesitate to show what he's capable of. But not even he will be able to do anything about the Hind territory, so the noble returned to his mansion. That is a hopeless land. Many mages have tried to do something about it, and all have failed. It will be no different with the prince. You won't be able to do anything in a land untouched by rain. But what he doesn't know is that rain is falling on that desolate land. The residents are also very surprised. No one can say for sure why that rain is happening. The protagonist took quite a while to find those hidden ruins. It will need to rain for a few more days before the land can be planted again. He has all this information thanks to that stone, because it's connected to other spirit stones scattered across the region, allowing him to understand the environment and control the weather of the entire area. In the end, humans are a species that evolved through laziness. With the leftover spirit stones, he crafted a place where he can store his items. Now he needs to wait patiently for the land to recover. A week had passed. The residents are gathering as if they were members of a crazy cult. Our protagonist is impressed by how many residents showed up, but they didn't let the prince work alone, and he warned that it would involve a lot of physical effort. Maybe the elderly wouldn't be able to handle it. People really like the prince and enjoy his remarks. He said that day's task is simple. He had asked the knights to draw lines around the region the day before they're going to clear all that land. The work will take 4 days. Those who don't feel up to it can leave without any issue. They will have time to rest, and he guaranteed that everyone would be paid for the work they're going to do. The knight said that even though it rained in recent days, the land is vast, and it won't be possible to cleanse it in just 4 days. But the prince is confident they'll manage to do it. Meanwhile, other residents are eager to witness yet another miracle. But the knight's faith is small. Even though he witnessed a miracle, his heart is hesitant, until a great light appeared before his eyes. Our protagonist was strengthening all the workers with his magic. The knight finally understood how this would be possible, and he also felt his body being strengthened. Because all the workers have been blessed, now they can really dig into the work with their hoes. Our protagonist thinks that if he had calderas, they could use an area of effect spell, but he said that's not the purpose of a sword. The knight wants to know what the prince plans to plant on that land. But there are only 2 ways to make money in a short period of time. What determines the value of something is its availability and scarcity. The demon lord wants to know how he plans to achieve both. The boy's answer is simple. He's going to plant moon grass on that land. His answer satisfied the knight. Throughout that entire territory, moon grass will be planted because it's something very rare. That plant doesn't grow just anywhere. It requires many specific conditions. It's imported at a very high price as it's used by alchemists and mages in their research. Reaching exorbitant prices is truly a scarce item. The knight said that moongrass won't grow in this climate, but the boy told him that the gods have blessed that land and the climate will be blessed too. The truth is that he only needs to adjust the weather using his magic stones. Now they need to find the vegetarians of the forest. The breeze carries some leaves to a woman with pointed ears. She was busy doing something but looked toward the window. She wished the blessing of nature upon her visitor. She learned of his visit through the spirits. Her name is Yuria, and the green-haired man is her master. His name is Medith, and he's the one who decided to visit her that day. She asked him to come in, and as he'll always be welcome there. The two are going to have some tea, and the man seems to have some news to deliver to her. He said he had a dream recently. She wanted to know what kind of dream would make him visit her in such a rush. The elf remained silent for a few moments. In this dream, the spirits had cursed the forest. That immediately made the girl worried. But she remembered something her master told her a long time ago, that the work of the spirits is to maintain the balance of things and there are events that are inevitable. He told his student that the forest is drying out, and that it's happening throughout the entire forest. That's why he came to ask her to return to her hometown, which lies within the sacred tree. She listened to this request patiently, but she was already at home, and besides, she's no longer welcome in their city. However, she asked her master to take the others from that place, so they wouldn't be affected by the curse. But her master was very worried, because he knows she could die if she remains in the forest. Yet to her, all of this is part of the natural course of things. The imminent danger did not bring her any fear, and maybe, just maybe, someone will appear who can save that place. After saying this, she began to enjoy the breeze that was blowing, as it was a sign that better times are coming. And she asked what her master thought of the tea, because this time she used grasshopper wings in the mix, making her master spit the tea out immediately. For a brief moment, he understood why the other elves don't want her in the capital. He had completely forgotten that even her own kind don't like her very much. They consider the girl a heretic and a psychopath. Our protagonist is walking through the forest. The demon lord didn't expect anyone to be living in that place, especially elves, who are not only rare, but also very hard to find. Since the Great War, they began hiding, and many people don't even know they exist. Our protagonist considers himself lucky, because during the battle with the monsters, he ended up discovering some forest spirits. If they're around, that's a sign the elves are too. The demon lord asked if it's okay to meet them, as it might be better to avoid them. She doesn't like those pointy-eared folks, and the protagonist isn't much of a fan either. El god Apollo humiliated that entire race, and just from seeing his memories, the demon lord already wants to keep her distance. They finally arrive at the elven forest. It's very different from the rest. The forest guardians were approaching them without fear. Due to his affinity with spirits, those animals must like him more than the elves themselves. Our protagonist had to live inside a pit of fire to develop this. Remembering the process makes him angry. The goddess who taught him this was born as a human. And the demon lord is truly impressed that he has such a strong connection with these creatures, even without having formed a contract. She wished the cute creatures liked her too. Now she wants to know how the protagonist will find moongrass, as he can't do it alone. Until they saw a small animal approaching. It landed on the protagonist's hand, bringing something. The demon lord can't believe it, but that's exactly what they were looking for. They found the garden of the moon goddess, and he thanked the little spirit for guiding them there. There are enough seeds there for them to plant across the entire region. But she was amazed to see what the protagonist was doing. Affinity with spirits is rooted in mana. Anyone with enough power can speak with spirits. Even so, progress is determined by one's spiritual affinity. With our protagonist's capabilities, there's no spirit in the world he can't summon. The demon lord wants to know if he'll make a contract with any spirit in that place. They explain that since the garden belongs to the moon goddess, as the name implies, is part of a spirit. So taking plants from there with spiritual power could upset that spirit. That's why the demon lord should just watch what he's doing. In another language, the boy asked if the spirit was there and if it could hear him. His voice echoed throughout the place. Water and fire appeared before him, and so did other elements too. This was a sign the spirits were listening. Our protagonist is speaking with them now. Now they have permission to take the plants, and they should be quick before meeting the elves. The demon lord asked where his courage had gone, but our protagonist wants to avoid unnecessary conflict. Unaware that he was already being watched, and the observer found it all amazing. The girl's teacher noticed she was distracted from the conversation. It's impressive that a human entered that cave, and even though he gained permission from the spirit, a human had done that. That place he's in is sacred to the elves, yet the boy managed to take the plants and communicate with the spirits. Now she doesn't know what to do about it. Because this is an unbelievable situation, not even her master would believe it. But he wants to know what's troubling the girl's mind. She asked why he had stopped drinking the tea she had prepared. She had worked hard to make it. It dried the locust bodies for over a week. Even so, her master is ignoring all her effort. He said he's not feeling very well. If that's the case, she has a recipe that could help him with that. But the master, thinking it might be something bizarre, avoids letting her keep offering it at all costs. Then she asked him what's more likely, a human entering the sacred garden and being able to talk to spirits, or a great being awakening from its slumber. But the master didn't quite understand that question, and asked if she was actually being serious. If we're talking just probabilities, the second is more likely. Despite the legends, dragons still exist. But humans couldn't speak with spirits. There are isolated cases of something, but they couldn't see the spirits of the forest. After hearing that explanation, she seemed very happy. She told her master that she would need to leave the village for a while, because she thinks she's found the solution, a way to save that entire village. But the master wants to know what solution she has found. Meanwhile, our protagonist is very surprised. The task that was supposed to take 4 days was completed in just half a day. That motivation was really strong. Now they can focus on planting the moon grass. After putting the residents to work, he could hear some rumors about the region. There are still doubts whether what he planted will actually sprout in that soil. The grass will take 4 to 5 months to fully grow. The plant needs the influence of the spirits to bloom, but they're going to sell the plants, not the flowers. Everything is going according to plan. The guard is worried, since no one in that town knows how to handle this kind of plant. And those that were born are slowly withering, but the protagonist asked him to keep waiting, because the gods would bless that land with rain once again. A few days pass, and the guard came to inform the prince that the day was very hot, but our protagonist asked him to remain calm. The rain came as predicted, leaving the guard quite surprised. Thus, our protagonist continued to control the humidity of that region. 4 months pass as if they were just a few days, and rumors are reaching the capital. Other kingdoms are also hearing that moon grass is being cultivated on the continent. That could only be madness, but it was the lord of that land himself who encouraged the planting. They know it's from the region of Hines, the region that was once visited by mages years ago because it was a cursed land. Apparently, that abandoned land is now being visited by rain. A woman said it would take at least a decade for that land to become productive again, and that the lord of those lands is the first prince of the Ron kingdom. Maybe he has completely lost his mind, and some nobles agree with that. But those who seemed to be mages became very thoughtful. He asked his servant not to say anything because the nobles are not aware of everything. This is the sage Harrison, leader of the Red Tower. It seems something very interesting is happening in the eastern part of the continent, and they should prepare for it. It was like the blink of an eye. That devastated land had become a blooming field. There were few seeds that could be used, but even so, they succeeded. Amy says they currently have 20,000 moon grass leaves in stock, and they plan to collect 10,000 more. By market standards, 4 leaves cost only 100 gold coins. If they count the sale of 10,000 of those leaves, they'll earn the equivalent of 5,000 platinum coins. A family can feed themselves for 2 weeks with just 1 gold coin and live comfortably for an entire month with 5. The economic potential of that is truly incredible. The Demon Lord would like to see what will happen when they sell all of them. Unlike the Spirit Stones, they made this public. And the strategy worked, even though many thought he was just a fool. And now he must make the most of the exposure he has gained. The preparations were properly completed. They are ready to cause a huge stir across the continent. Moongrass leaves appear on the market twice a month in quantities insufficient for both continents, because it is a raw material used in every type of magic. And for that reason, there's a big problem. Our protagonist spread another rumor along with the release of the leaves, that he was bedridden after attempting to plant those seeds. The Demon Lord said he's blinded by money, but sometimes he needs to act that way. The massive supply of a scarce item will cause his price to drop significantly, so he must be cautious to avoid devaluing the leaves. That's not what he wants right now because he'd like to make a lot of money. Several people are gathered at the gates of his palace. Everyone wants to meet him. After the rumor spread, the region became chaotic. That land is overflowing with merchants. Our protagonist asked his maid to tell them all that he is sick, but the merchants want to see the product. They really are money-hungry barbarians. So our protagonist met with the townspeople. They asked Big God how security is going. Everyone is working very hard, but they're short on people. The entire city is overwhelmed because of the visitors. Our protagonist ordered him to pull aside anyone who seems suspicious to avoid bigger problems. He needs to maintain basic courtesy, but he's not obligated to understand all those people. The empty houses were modified to accommodate the visitors, but it's still not enough. He said they could use the tents he had purchased. He could resell them to these people and recommended setting an exorbitant price. Thus, the meeting came to an end. But he asked Bigot to wait a little longer. The captain doesn't know why the Lord wants to talk to him, and our protagonist said he'd like to have a quick word with him. At night, the captain is warmly welcomed at the tavern. When invited to drink, he said he'd do it another time and recommended that everyone take it easy that night. In his bed, he is completely exhausted because he has many duties throughout the day, training soldiers, overseeing security, and taking etiquette lessons. He's never been this busy in his entire life. The man has a message for him. There is someone in that place who wants to speak with the captain, so get ready to meet that person. That young man is named Hallis, and he is a 4th level expert from the Green Tower. He apologized for disturbing the captain, but the man was understanding. The mage knows the region is in chaos and that the captain was protecting that area even before it reached prosperity. It's truly amazing that the Lord can count on such a reliable man as that captain. Mustache realized he was dealing with a flatterer, so he asked what the mage wanted to do. His intention is to speak with the lord of those lands, and he wants to know from the captain if there's any way to make that happen. The captain said that might not be possible, as the lord is sick from working too much, and the leader's health is everyone's priority. The mage understood that this was truly important. Then he pulled out a bag that looked quite full of money, asking if there was anything they could do to be helped. The captain was very impressed with all that money, but he said he doesn't accept bribes under any circumstances. The mage assured him that it was just a gift, because he would like to build a good relationship with his captain. He stated that he usually doesn't accept gifts like that, but the flatterer kept insisting for him to accept that small gift. But Mustache realized everything was happening just as the Lord had predicted. That's why they had spoken privately. He said the captain would be dealing with many people. Everyone would be eager to meet the prince, and that's why he'd become a target for these people. They would offer him bribes, so the prince asked him to choose carefully. He should make a list of those who make absurd demands to report back to the prince, and he should accept all bribes offered to him. Additionally, he must pretend to submit to their requests and should show them that small vial. A vial of that costs 100 gold coins. The goal isn't to sell it, but just to spread a few rumors, so they can raise its value as much as possible, keeping people in that territory for as long as possible. Seeing that small potion, the mage was immediately surprised. The captain said that's the product they're cultivating in that place. It would soon be for sale, so there's no problem showing it to that person. And the mage had no doubt that item was of extremely high quality. He had never seen anything that good in that part of the continent in terms of efficiency. It's at least twice as good as what they're used to. He needs priority access to these items and praised their quality extensively. The captain assured him the products would be of similar quality. Those that don't pass quality control are turned into fertilizer. The mage saw that as a huge waste and learned that they had prepared 10,000 units of that potion. He quickly realized that if they could produce that much, they must have discarded at least the same amount. The boy is truly determined, and they can't ignore what he's managed to accomplish. The captain said that particular sample would be put up for auction, but he knows they will keep selling those items. The mage is very excited and nervous about this news because he knows someone will be given priority access to those items. Leaving that house, he confirmed that the captain would be compensated for the information he gave. So they shook hands, and he headed to his carriage. The captain was very surprised as his performance had been perfect. The next day, he went to speak with the prince because he wanted to know how he knew all of that. He said it's just how life works. People like to accumulate wealth, and they're simply taking advantage of things as they are. The captain was even more impressed. He brought the prince all the bribes he had received, and the prince told him to take that wealth as a bonus for the guards. He should divide it among them to use however they want. He tried to refuse, but the prince said he should take it. Most of the profit from the sale would go to him anyway. The demon lord wants to know if the boy can handle all the pressure, but he made it clear that the buyers are already competing with one another. Soon people will stay in the territory, which will attract other merchants. That will accelerate the sale of land in the city, and consequently increase the number of citizens in the area. All of this because of the moon grass. It's hard to imagine that this land used to be unproductive. The news keeps spreading across the continent, and other magic towers want to invest in that city. Perhaps the Red Tower should do that too, but this man is quite cautious. He told his master that something is bothering him. He's heard the prince wants to sell the items through an auction. From their perspective, that could end up drastically lowering the price of those plants. At first, it will be very expensive, but soon the prices will become very affordable. That's why products are imported with an expiration date, to keep the prices high. The elder mage thinks the prince is an enlightened person. He asked his disciple if he knew how many people live in that city. He guessed a few hundred. That made him realize this is a great opportunity to invest in the territory in a short amount of time, because he managed to attract the attention of many people from all over the continent. That strategy is impressive. Even if the products are resold, their quantity won't be increasing. The mage told his disciple to start saving money for what's coming, and he emphasized that the prince is acting as if failure wouldn't be a problem, so moongrass is just the first step he's taking. He certainly has much more to show all of them, and he's already gained the attention of many people. That's why they should build a good relationship with this young man and his disciple agreed. He ordered him to arrange a meeting with the prince because he wants to meet him. The sage began to recall some things. The words of the princess, asking if it was possible for a man without mana to cut a vampire with a sword. The princess asked that with an empty expression, because the man who did that used the sacred sword without forming a contract with it. At the time, he thought it was foolishness, but he knows that's only possible if you're the sword god himself or his disciple. Apparently, there's a very eccentric person in this world, which is rather strange. As predicted by the prince, many people want to live in that region, and that started to cause disputes among the visitors. Amy came to say that two groups want to buy the same piece of land. The prince's solution was to put the land up for auction. The butler wanted to know what the price cap should be, and the prince told him to make it as high as possible. For it said that a man rich in land is also rich in fortune. Our protagonist is very pleased with how much money he's been making lately, and he was informed that a letter had been addressed to him. The prince wanted to know if it was important enough to read. It was said to be from the royal palace. Outside in the city square, the auction began. The first bid was 90 gold coins, but it was quickly raised by a hooded young man. The mage from the Green Tower was also participating in the auction, increasing the offer. Everyone seemed very interested. Those mages appeared to have a personal rivalry going on, until one man made a bid of 130 gold coins. That caused them to start arguing. Amy tried to continue the auction even though the participants were fighting. If there were no more bids, the property would be sold for that amount. Some people kept fighting in the square, and the mage believed he would win that plot of land. Amy was ready to close the auction, until someone else showed interest. Our protagonist was impressed that each vial had been sold for 150 gold coins. A trade guild ended up buying 5,000 vials. The auction had been a success. The remaining vials were sold individually at 130 gold coins each, and they were completely sold out. If sales continue this way, the city's annual profit will reach around 1 million gold coins, making it the richest territory in the entire kingdom. They will continue cultivating moon grass, but they won't increase the scale. Now they will start planting food. The prince has no interest in increasing his greed in this area and will leave things as they are. From now on, they will reorganize the city and get rid of anything that isn't being used. A summons from the royal palace was made a few days before the auction was held. The message was very simple. They praised the prince's achievements and asked him to return to the capital for a brief period, so he could be praised for his accomplishments. The same people who sent him away now want him to come back. Our protagonist is annoyed by their indecision. He's sure the political fight involving his mother's knight must be heating up, and are trying to shift focus. Our protagonist finds it curious that they sent the letter with the king's seal, but the people acting are not the king. Now he wants to begin the next part of his plan. Maybe he really should visit them, and he will stop by the royal palace. In his memories, he was told that someone had built a dungeon beneath his house. He couldn't complete his last task and suggested that the protagonist do it in his place. Then he could do whatever he wanted with it. He imagined he could ruin the work, but the mysterious man finds that comment amusing, because he doubts that anyone more stubborn than himself could ruin what he had already started. But the boy is going to find out as soon as he enters that place. If he completes this task, he'll be free to do whatever he wants with it. They asked if the prince would be alright traveling alone, but that's exactly what he wants to do, and the butler wished him a safe journey. The prince asked him to take care of Amy, and the butler told him not to worry, because she's an incredible and very disciplined person, in addition to being extremely well-educated and intelligent. From the protagonist's point of view, he's sure the two will get along just fine. Now they continue their journey toward the capital, traveling the path on horseback. The demon lord noticed that he's heading in the opposite direction, but he wants to stop somewhere before continuing his path, a well-known place, and one that's being preserved for research. Besides that, it's a very special place, because it's the city of the divine blacksmith Surtur. The demon lord knows who this person is, and the protagonist is sure they've met. He said that the man's legacy is kept in that place, made from the same material as calderas. But this is not a place they can easily enter. In a few decades, the landscape may shift, but that city has stood for thousands of years. It has now become the location of another state. That territory belongs to a rival family, the Beret. The boy dismounts to approach the city entrance. Berserker sense that the atmosphere there is unfriendly. It's possible that the noble factions in that area have been shaken. Even so, the line to enter the city is very long. Our protagonist presents an ID card, introducing himself as a mercenary. It's an identity he prepared. He couldn't risk being recognized, but that's not something he needs to worry about right now, because he's sure he'll get in without trouble. But he's immediately stopped by armed men. The protagonist got a little tense. They know he must be there to explore the newly discovered labyrinth. They said it would be far too difficult for someone like him. Some soldiers laughed at the protagonist. He realized something strange is going on in that city. The protagonist sat on a rock to observe the surroundings. The situation there was worse than he expected. An old man approached our protagonist. He noticed the young man had no idea what was going on, so he must be from far away. The prince asked what was happening. Then the old man pointed to a line. Some people were paying for access. He realized there was a toll being charged there, and the old man said that's normal. The law that allows such tolls should be abolished. The old man saw that the young man seemed quite upset. He placed some coins in his hand so he could pass. It wasn't much, but it might help him on his journey. He just asked that the young man not get himself into trouble, that he shouldn't worry about the coins because when the old man looks at him, he's reminded of his grandson. For a moment, our protagonist didn't know how to respond, but he was very grateful for the old man's help. He said the old man should keep the coins and buy a gift for his grandson, because he won't need that money. The old man grew very worried about the young man, thinking he might do something reckless, and the guards saw that he was still there. The young man reached out his hand and asked for the money to be returned. That toll was illegal, only allowed for large processions and commercial caravans. It was also a crime to collect it for personal gain. The guards underestimated the young man, unaware of who he really is. Then our protagonist said he wouldn't warn them again. They should return the money and confess their crimes, even though he knew that wouldn't lead anywhere. The guards began to laugh at his stance, until a sword was pointed at his neck. They said there would be no consequences if they decided to end the life of this young mercenary. The protagonist realized they weren't going to change their minds. He was only waiting for confirmation. Seeing that things might get dangerous, the old man tried to step in, but the guards completely ignored the old man's words. He saw that he could end up suffering the consequences as well. One guard decided he would take the old man's life. His sword was already swinging to cut him down, but he was quickly disarmed by our protagonist, who hadn't expected the man to be so cowardly as to raise his blade against an old man. The poor old man tried to protect himself with his hands and didn't see what happened. Our protagonist confirmed that the guard's behavior is considered a crime on the continent, and there's only one kind of punishment for that kind of conduct. Our protagonist already had his sword in hand. The penalty for those crimes is immediate execution. The bald man is now headless. The responsibility now falls on those who agreed with that behavior. He demanded that the person in charge be presented immediately, but instead he was surrounded by their remaining guards. He realized these men also wanted to lose their heads and admitted that it was his fault for not revealing his identity. Before he could continue speaking, one of the guards tried to attack him, but the attack failed, because it's not possible to strike without hands. The protagonist warned that the next cut would be to the head, and that he wouldn't repeat himself. He again demanded to see the one in command, until someone came over to see what was going on. That small man was Viscount Gerda, who came to investigate the commotion. Before he got too close, the protagonist tossed in a formal document. He advised him to make a wise decision and not to underestimate the prince just because he wasn't flanked by guards. The Viscount quickly recognized the prince's identity, who was relieved to finally be recognized. Kneeling before the prince, the Viscount explained that the territory had been going through difficult times, but our protagonist didn't believe that since they had famous ruins in the area. The Viscount never imagined the prince would travel in disguise, scolding people so recklessly. That was an act of tyranny, but the prince hadn't expected the Viscount to be waiting for a formal announcement of his arrival. He said the Duke would not ignore this incident. The more he spoke, the worse the situation became, and the more irritated the protagonist grew. Most territories are like this. Even inspectors would turn a blind eye out of fear of retaliation. The Viscount asked the prince to come to his estate, promising he wouldn't regret it. But our protagonist wanted to know if the Viscount had heard the rumors, that he's a madman thirsty for blood. And after saying that, he cut off the noble's head. Berserker complimented the clean and well-executed cut. Our protagonist is now continuing his journey. The old man said it had been 10 years. Life was peaceful and the Baron was still alive. But the exploitation kept getting worse, victimizing their own people. That's how he lost his only son. The boy understood the old man was talking about his son, not his grandson. He apologized for the lie. But the protagonist said there was nothing to forgive, and knowing the old man, he imagined his son must have been a good person. They finally arrived at their destination. Our protagonist is admiring the landscape. And this is where Valhalla begins. What a horrible name. If it comes up again, I'm calling it Detroit. That's the famous ruin. The old man asked if the incident with the Viscount would cause trouble for him, but the prince assured him the Duke had bigger concerns. For being saved and for having his son avenged, the old man gave his thanks. He would never forget such kindness. Our protagonist wished that he would continue walking the straight and true path, and so he said goodbye to that man. Berserker thought that story was quite depressing, and hopes the man can have happier days. And the protagonist helped make that possible. They are now inside those mysterious ruins. Our protagonist continues searching within the place. It really is magnificent. He began consulting his own notes. Berserker wasn't sure whether he should say it, but he believed there was nothing left there to be discovered. Our protagonist said that's just the outer appearance. He's searching for something still hidden. There's a password in that place, which made the demon lord curious, because the boy found it. The entire place is constructed like a massive puzzle, and the codes can only be seen from a higher vantage point. This was done by Sir himself. Some people in the past must have discovered it too, but the protagonist may be the only living person who knows this, and he may be the only one capable of finding that treasure. The secret entrance is at the anvil in the center of the plaza. To access it, the password is required. And now he is about to gain access to the legacy of the God of the Forge. He's finally going to find the One Piece. Mysterious stairs appeared, and now he has access to the hidden dungeon. Berserker imagined there must be many things hidden in that place. The entire area is well designed. There's magic circulating the air within. If he hadn't met Sir himself, that place would have remained hidden forever. Even the demon lord agreed with that. Upon finding a room, our protagonist was very impressed. That place seemed to have a life of its own. It didn't even resemble a dungeon. When he was alive, people thought Sir was insane since he lived in his forge. After Harris passed away, he came to this place to work for the rest of his life. Our protagonist kept inspecting the room because all of his friends' treasures were inside until he found the large chest. The demon lord noticed it looked like an altar. The protagonist found it strange that Sir might have worshipped a god he never respected. While he was walking, something started to happen in that place. A bright light began shining from the chest. They were inside what seemed to be a vault. It was the first time the demon lord had seen such an intricate design. The chest continued glowing intensely. Still, the protagonist approached it. Among the dwarves, he had been given another title. For working 1,000 days without stopping, he was known as the Demon of the Forge. Unlike those who boast simply for striking metal correctly, Surtur went beyond his limits, infusing his work with mana. And that was his final creation to be completed posthumously. The energy color of the chest changed. It was now glowing yellow. At last, our protagonist managed to open that chest. Inside, he found a blade that hadn't yet been named, cut through living things. There was another blade in that chest as well, one that cut through dead things. Neither had been finished. They were twin swords. The system confirmed it was truly the final work of a great blacksmith, and their power was unknown. Their personalities had yet to awaken. That fact made the protagonist thoughtful, but it was something to be expected from the work of his blacksmith friend. These blades were as powerful as calderas. That was the most powerful divine sword, made to be fully wielded by Harris. Now these two blades are designed to adapt to their wielder. Their purpose is to find their master. To our protagonist, that's perfect, and they already seem complete. But only upon close inspection did he realize they weren't. They needed small adjustments to be finished. He had to find some fire to complete the work. Normal fire wouldn't be enough for the task. It needed to burn 100 times hotter. And only the dwarves have something like that, because they specialize in that kind of work. Our protagonist had to ask someone for information, who wished him a pleasant stay in the capital, and the young man thanked them for the guidance. Our protagonist didn't know why he had been summoned to the capital. The letter said he was going to be congratulated, but that was obvious. Lunar grass has enormous potential for generating money, and our protagonist is already profiting more than the entire kingdom. The taxes he sent were massive. The nobles surely want to persuade him to join one of their factions. At least that's what he assumes is going to happen. Our protagonist hadn't expected to receive so much attention and didn't want to cause such an impact on the continent. He was already in the palace hallways and was greeted by some of the servants. The boy responded politely, since it had been a while since they last saw each other. The butler said he had grown quite a bit. He had heard rumors that the prince had managed to build a great business. He replied that the gods were favoring his plans, but he wanted to know why the atmosphere felt strange. The butler explained that some secrets had come to light. The king was furious, and many nobles ended up losing their heads. Since the king was already in his chambers, the butler recommended speaking to him the next day. Even with all the evidence presented to the knight, he would only succeed with the king's cooperation. These events were making the boy think a lot. He ended up encountering a peculiar person. The two stared at each other for a moment. That was one of his brothers, the envious one. Our protagonist hadn't expected to run into Carlos at that moment. He asked if the boy had anything to say to him, but he said everything was fine. He told him his brother was far too careless for a bastard who had succeeded in just one business venture, and that he'd obviously had luck, not success. The protagonist didn't believe the envious one came all the way there just to say that. It seemed he was simply jealous, because he had no idea what the prince had accomplished, and for that reason, he would always be known as a fool. Those words made the envious one furious, and he tried to grab the protagonist's neck, which he blocked effortlessly, saying the envious one had nothing. He forgot something important because everyone there spoils him excessively. He should at least be able to understand the situation. Completely enraged, the envious one tried to attack the protagonist. But he's a hopeless fool. If he weren't so stupid, he never would have fired those arrows 6 years ago. And now the protagonist has run out of patience. Reacting to the aggression, he grabbed the envious one's arm and was about to slam him headfirst into the ground. The envious one realized his face was about to be smashed. But our protagonist controlled the fall and said that his brother's words were blasphemy against the king, and that he'd been acting this way just because his brother was born of a concubine, forgetting that he too carries the king's blood. To try and discipline his brother, he stomped on his chest with force. After letting him go, he asked if that hurt, because that was the intention. But he realized he was making references his brother didn't understand. Not even a narrator would know them. Even so, the boy was visibly intimidated and received a flick to the forehead, stronger than a punch. That blow definitely caused him pain, because his scream of agony echoed throughout the entire corridor. The boy's forehead was bleeding. He couldn't understand how that was possible. Our protagonist asked if he wanted another flick, and the envious one was terrified. He warned that he would take revenge, saying the prince would never do that to him again. As the envious one ran off, the prince laughed at the scene. The demon lord asked if he was really going to let the boy go with just a flick, but the protagonist made it more interesting because it wasn't a normal flick, and he probably shouldn't even tell her that. Berserker noticed he sometimes acts more like a villain. Either way, the protagonist wasn't going to keep laughing about the situation. He needs to put an end to his bad habits. Burning with curiosity, the demon lord wanted to know what the protagonist had done. He cast on the boy a spell that's considered a universal sin, but that wasn't all he did. He also gave him a small gift, which would be revealed during the next day's meeting. Several nobles were impressed with what the boy had accomplished in that devastated region. Because of that, he also increased the kingdom's revenue. The chatter was so loud the king couldn't concentrate. The nobles were all talking among themselves, excluding the one who had made everything happen. And then Knight Petrus was also absent from the meeting, as he had no interest in those matters. Berserker couldn't understand how the kingdom still functioned with so much disorganization. Meanwhile, the protagonist was thinking about opening a restaurant since he knew the profits were extremely high. But he didn't know how to manage a business like that. Someone asked the nobles to be quiet. The king said they should congratulate the prince for what he had done. Acknowledging that everything he accomplished was done without anyone's help, our protagonist replied that he did what was necessary. And the king reinforced the point. His progress was worth 10 years of hard work. He asked what the prince wanted as a reward. The protagonist knew the nobles would make a fuss about anything he might request. He said he didn't have anything in mind yet and asked for a little more time, which the king granted. Berserker said he made a very wise decision in asking for time. The nobles wanted to seize control of lunar grass production, seeing it as a golden commercial opportunity. It was clear they weren't letting go of the matter. One man said he needed to confirm something before the conversation could continue. That man was Duke Berit, whose lands are filled with corruption. He said the nobles were ignoring something very basic: how to use the plan for the kingdom's benefit. The protagonist realized he was a man with authority over the aristocrats. He suggested that the business model created by the prince should not be taken over by the government, a proposal that was definitely bold. He asked if Marquis Ferrandus would give up his own assets for the good of the kingdom. Therefore, it's up to the prince and the king to decide the future of that business, not the aristocrats. At first, it seemed like he was helping our protagonist, but the prince didn't believe it. It was just wordplay. And the man kept defending his ideas, saying they shouldn't suppress new business models. The boy realized that's exactly what the Duke planned to do. There was also something more important. They needed a mediator for the whole situation. Our protagonist realized it was all for show. He only seemed concerned. And then he revealed a letter he had received from the priest of the Holy Kingdom, which surprised even the king. The prince was being invited to visit the Holy Kingdom so they could examine the stigma he had received and consecrate him as a saint. The contents of the letter left one of the aristocrats furious, because the prince is the heir to the territory and he shouldn't be sent to the Holy Land. Other nobles joined the discussion, saying that the Holy Kingdom rivals the Empire in power, but that aristocrat insisted they were not vassals of the Holy Kingdom, and the prince shouldn't be handed over like a tribute. The prince wanted to know if he really needed to go to that kingdom for his stigma to be recognized, and what would happen after he was declared a saint. The duke told him he needed to look at the forest, not just the trees, because he has a dubious royalty, and you shouldn't forget that nothing good comes from disobeying the Holy Kingdom. But our protagonist didn't seem impressed. The nobles wanted to know what would happen to the prince's territory and the production of lunar grass. If he were consecrated as a saint, he would no longer be allowed to manage his own lands. That news shook the nobles, but it was all part of a conspiracy, because now they had to decide who would become the new lord of that land. Watching that political game, the protagonist was thoroughly entertained, because now he truly understood the duke's goal. The prince's territory had become vital to the kingdom's future and couldn't be handed over to just anyone. And in his view, there was only one person they wanted to manage it: the second prince, the envious one. Our protagonist realized the plan was to privatize the business and then hand it to his jealous brother so the duke could profit as well. It had all been a big performance. The envious one believed he was going to inherit that land, but the protagonist hadn't made his move yet. The second prince approached the king to win his approval, while being watched by our protagonist. But when he tried to speak, he made a sound like a frog. An awkward silence took over the hall. He stood frozen before the king, and everyone remained stunned, not knowing what was happening. Our protagonist tried to hold back his laughter. The envious one felt something was wrong, but the urge to make strange sounds was stronger than him, and he started making other noises in the middle of the hall, imitating animals, which left the nobles even more surprised. The demon queen also found the whole thing hilarious. But the protagonist said it was still early, she would laugh even more soon. The Duke asked what the prince was doing because there's a limit to clownish behavior. He tried to explain, but the urge to make bizarre noises overwhelmed him, until the king reprimanded him, thinking it was some kind of joke. The envious one tried to explain, but mid-sentence he started quacking like a duck, then barking like a dog. The king was already very irritated by the whole scene. He ordered the prince out of his sight and called the guards. They were to take the prince to his room, where he was to remain until the king changed his mind. The envious one tried to make his father change his mind, but he couldn't stop making animal noises. The scene was so bizarre that the king became genuinely embarrassed, and the envious one tried to escape the guards, dropping his hat on the ground. As it flew, the nobles turned to look, and were utterly shocked. Not even the demon queen imagined this would happen. This was what our protagonist had hinted at. His brother was now the newest bald man in the kingdom, a head so smooth and shiny it gleamed like a star. Now everyone knew he was bald too. The prince said his brother was still far too immature to manage a territory. The Duke looked back, realizing his plans had been ruined, and the prince looked at him with a genuine smile. He wanted to know since when the position of Duke outranked that of the king. The noble played dumb, and the protagonist said he'd rephrase the question. He asked if the kingdom belonged to the Duke, and the Duke replied that the prince must have misunderstood him, because everything he does is for the good of the kingdom. The prince then asked why he had a letter from the Holy Kingdom without the king's knowledge. And that wasn't the only accusation he had, because he had also conspired with everyone present in that room. The Duke said he should be careful with his accusations, but our protagonist hadn't finished speaking. He said the Duke shouldn't count his chickens before they hatch. Besides, they hadn't resolved a single real issue during that session, which was supposedly important, and he tried to use that opportunity to take control of land that belongs to the prince. From our protagonist's point of view, the Duke is nothing more than a conspirator, and he suggested that they meet the demands of the Holy Kingdom. The king wanted to know what the prince's proposal was. The Holy Kingdom is also inhabited by people. They could speak with them. In that place, there was an artifact that allowed communication with a priest from the kingdom. He introduced himself and said he was in charge of finances. His name was Vicar. Our protagonist apologized for the sudden contact and asked him what the Pope's decision was. But what happened next was even more surprising. Even though it's a holy kingdom, it's made up of people, a place where business also happens. And the prince was trying to do business with the highest ranking figure in the Holy Kingdom. But the priest on the other end said the incident was being handled by ordinary priests, and that would never happen again. There was no reason for concern. In this way, the protagonist managed to resolve all of his problems, and he thanked the priest for his help, who replied that it wasn't difficult at all. He found it odd that the kingdom would send the prince to the Holy Land, though he acknowledged it wouldn't have been a bad acquisition. In the long run, it's the Holy Kingdom that would lose. The protagonist told the Pope that if he left his territory, lunar grass production would be compromised. He promised to reserve a portion of the production to supply the Holy Kingdom, and from that point on, they would be commercial partners. The priest was very thankful for that. And the Pope also made a major request that those plants be sold in his lands. Those who want to be treated specially must offer something in return, and that's exactly what the protagonist did. Now he has respectable commercial partners. After all of this, the prince commented that doing business is very easy, but Berserker